but I kind of, I don't know, I didn't think that this would be what it turned out to be. And that's maybe my fault. I judged a book its cover. But I think when I started actually dating Nick, he surprised me so much. Don't tell anyone, guys, even though this is live streaming. I call him Old Man Jonas. It's my name for him, OMJ. He's such a old soul, extremely smart, so good for me because he grounds me so much. I'm a wild child. I do whatever I want, whenever I want, and he always supports me. One of the first things that I think struck me about him was we were on a date, and it was time for the date to get over, and we were a bunch of friends. And I had a meeting, and I was dropping hints to my friends. They were like, no, don't go for a meeting, just stay. And I was like, no, if someone gives me reason enough to cancel it, I'll cancel it. And he just didn't pick up the hint. Like, he was just like, I said it twice, I said it thrice. Finally, he took me aside and he was like, look, I'm not stupid, I know what you're trying to do. But I will never be the one who will tell you to cancel work because I know how hard you've worked to be where you are. So if you could have cancelled it, you would have done it. I'll take our friends out for dinner and we'll wait for you. And you finish your meeting and come back. And I was just like, that's the first time someone's ever done that.
Well, also so wonderful to know that you would have somebody who really respected and understood your own work drive.
Absolutely, and who gave me credit for what I had done. It was just mind-blowing for me.
Well, your wedding was obviously, you played it king size in every way.
Hopefully it'll be the only one, so I was like...
Yes. So... Were you making a statement with that? Because it was so glorious to watch, the way it just kind of accumulated into this kind of incredible fiesta that we saw.
Well, I knew it was going to be 3 days because Indian weddings do have pre-rituals. And I knew that both of us wanted like one wedding in each of our religions, so that was 2 days anyway. But it all happened so fast. Like, we decided to prep this wedding in October, and we got married 1st of December. And in that 1.5 months, we were just like, yeah, that sounds great. Sure, let's get that. And did not realize it till it was done. And we saw videos and then the bill. We were like, oh, cool. Maybe you should prep this a little bit more. So that's why it was that glorious, you guys.
Okay, well, it's pretty hard, though, for two stars, with such kind of huge followings and all of these work demands to actually kind of connect and carve out time. How are you doing that? How are you carving out time to be together?
I think that's really important in any relationship, not just in a marriage. Whether it's with your friends, with your family, with your loved ones, is you have to prioritize what's important to you. We make sure whenever we have manageable schedules that we spend that time with each other. Like, if I'm filming, he'll come down and he'll stay where I am for a couple of days because at that time he has time off, or if I have time off and there's something I can do. We just make sure we don't go more than 2 weeks without seeing each other. That's important.
And you do this work with UNICEF. Are you going to do philanthropy together? Are you now going to become, a couple that focuses your philanthropy, or keep it separate?
Both.
Yeah.
I think we want to be able to definitely do it together as well. Nick has always been philanthropic. His parents have been. I have been. My parents have been. We come from a family where philanthropy is not a choice, it's just what you do. It's second nature, and he has individually been doing it, but we've discussed many things that we want to do together, and we know that we have the ability to. It's in fact our favorite phrase, that we want to change the world in whatever way we can, somehow.
Yeah. And what is your focus going to be? I mean, you've been working mostly, directed towards children, right? Is that going to be your focus?
For me, it always has been children. Yeah. It always has been education, children's rights. I really, really believe that if we pay attention, and we don't enough, to the children of the world, the world becomes a better place. I was in a few refugee camps when I went on trips with UNICEF, and there were all of these kids who were telling me their life's dreams, right? And they're all in refugee camps for like 5 years, 6 years. And they're like, I want to be an astronaut, and I want to be a dentist, and I want to be a teacher. And I knew when I was sitting in front of these kids that they wouldn't be all of that, because they don't have an education. Forget a formal education. They're in a refugee camp, thousands and thousands of these kids. Now think about the fact that if we don't give them a pen in their hand, and if the world doesn't care about the children of the future, how vulnerable they are to violence, how vulnerable are they for someone to put a gun in their hand and say, you know what, the world didn't care about you, why should you care about the world? And that's what we need to stop and protect. I mean, we may not be able to do it for our own generation because, you know, people are making this world into an extremely violent place, but I feel like if we target the kids and give them a place where they feel like they're wanted, they have the ability to take their futures into their own hands, it'll just change the mindset of the world. And I really, really want to be able to do that.
That is so good. I knew you were going to get clapped for that. You've also got involved with Bumble, right? And you're bringing a dating app to India. And I'm sort of fascinated about that because, you know, India is a place which is sort of traditionally where arranged marriages have been such an important part of its culture. In some ways, I suppose a dating app is also about the kind of, you know, the preview and the choice, you know, and the kind of, it's not about the chemistry meeting, it's about choosing and making a kind of pragmatic choice. Do you find there is a kind of cultural resonance for dating apps in India?
So there are other dating apps in India. A couple of things. One, like I said, that it's an amazing time in India with the meeting of modernity and tradition that's happening. You have urban India, urban culture, where people are travel, they know about the world, everyone knows what's happening. There is a culture of dating, definitely is. My parents had a love match, not an arranged match. So, I mean, India is just so diverse, it can't be generalized. Second of all, Bumble, I'm very excited about it and super proud. Bumble is not just a dating app, it's a social network. So it has Bumble Dating, which is what it's known for mostly in America, but it has Bumble BFF, and the best part about it is Bumble Biz, which is it's sort of like whatever aspirations you might have, you can connect with people around wherever you are to help you take those aspirations forward when you make the first step. And why it's so amazing for India, when I met Whitney last year, I was listening to her talk about Bumble in the US, and the amazing part about it is that it gives the choice to women. And I can't speak for every woman in India because they're all so different, but I know the power of choice, the power of me having my choice, and we as independent women in the world, we take it for granted, the ability to have a say in our own lives. There are so many women around the world who have no say in when they'll go to school, when they won't go to school, who they will marry, what their lives will look like. And this sort of gives women a choice to be able to make a dent in not just their personal life, but also in their business and also in friendships. And I just found that so powerful and profound and wanted to be able to take it to India.
Yeah. So, well, you're such a more than a triple threat. You're a quintuplet threat, Priyanka. So what do you want to do next? I mean, here you are in the US now. You have the world at your feet. You have this wonderful new marriage. I mean, what is the next decade for you in your mind? I mean, well, the next 5 years, okay, you have a game plan. You're very driven. I know that you're not just bopping along, thinking about being a wild child, even though you pretend you are.
Pretend I am. Okay. I'm not a planner, honestly.
Yeah.
I really am not. All I know is that opportunity strikes when you don't expect it. The smarter thing to do is to recognize opportunity than work so hard in trying to create it. If you, like, that's what I've done all my life. Like, when I came into America, I started doing Quantico. I knew the people I was meeting. I met amazing people that I'm writing a book this year. My editor, Pam, is here. I'm producing not just in India, but I'm also producing in America. I'm developing movies and television that I'm helping write myself. And these are all things that came out of opportunities when I had conversations with people like you. Just exactly like our conversation backstage.
Yeah, we've just planned an India summit in 6 cities, just in the green room. So, I'm on the train with the Priyanka train now.
But it really is. I believe that ideas are the currency of the present. Allow your brain to have ideas. Think about how you can make those ideas real, because this is the time when we can do it. Never before in the history of mankind have we been able to sit in our homes, have an idea, maybe create it into an app and monetize it.
Right.
You can do anything anywhere. It's just that people hold themselves back thinking that, oh, I don't know if I could even attempt this because I don't have connections, or you can make the connections. It's all in the mindset, and that has to be pivoted a little bit.
Well, Priyanka, anything you do, believe me, you can pull it off. So I want to thank you enormously for being with us.
Thank you
Priyanka
so much.
Chopra. I could talk to you all night. You're so good.
Student leaders have been at the fore of these protests against Nicolas Maduro.
This is by far the most dangerous thing I've ever covered. They dropped a bomb about 150 meters from where I was standing.
I can hear a mortar that's incoming.
How about that? Amazing. I am John Avlon from CNN, and it is my delight and honor to be with three of the most accomplished, respected foreign correspondents in the world today. And we begin, as they say, with breaking news. It is amazing that Omar al-Bashir, as of today, the dictator of Sudan, for several decades has been removed as Sudan's president. Nima, you have done some of the most extraordinary reporting from Sudan, particularly in the chronicling the uprising that's been occurring that may have toppled him. I want to show folks some of your recent clips from Sudan and then get your take on what's happening right now.
This is my hometown, Khartoum, for months now in the grip of pro-democracy protests. Much of it brutally hidden from the world by Sudan's government. And yet people here are still risking everything for change. Even as the United States works to restore diplomatic relations with Sudan's government. The Sudanese government doesn't want the world to know what's happening. Any journalist caught reporting on the demonstrations risks life imprisonment and the death penalty. In the crowd, I try to stand back and film with secret cameras and smartphones and hope that I'm not spotted.
Nima, extraordinary, right? Nima, tell us, I know you were on the phone with contacts as of this morning. You're going to be heading back there after this panel. What's the latest on what's happening in Sudan today?
What's really extraordinary, I think, about what's happening in Sudan is that the majority of Sudan's population is under the age of 30. So this is a generation that grew up under this dictatorship. These are his children. These are his boys and girls. They have no freedom of press. They have no freedom of expression. And yet, in spite of that vacuum, they have been able to visualize what it is they want. And what they want is what everybody else wants. And even in spite of the fact that the military came out and said, we are removing the president, we are giving you what you want, they have the persistence and the bravery to say, that is not enough. We will not take, you are not giving us this. This is ours. These are our rights. These are our freedoms. And they're still out there, outside of the military HQ. They're refusing to leave. And what has been so extraordinary to me, I mean, I'm 40, so I have known nothing other than Omar al-Bashir. I have never voted in an election in my own country. I voted once in England, and I turned up with like 8 different forms of ID, expecting there to be like some kind of military guard, because I couldn't even conceive of just like you turn up and you go, yes, this is my name, and I tick, and what? This is how it works. But these kids get it, and the way that women have been at the forefront of that. The rest of that piece, which is way too long to show you, was 2 women, 2 girls actually, 21, 22, who had been tortured by the Sudanese intelligence services, who were able to show us, to describe to us where the torture houses were. We were able to to use Google Images to find those torture houses, and they insisted on having their faces showed. They gave me their full names, and then one of them started to get agitated at the end of the interview, and I was thinking, oh, okay, do I need to step in? Is she not comfortable about her choice? And I said, are you okay? And she said, I just need to know when we're going to wrap this up, because I'm going back down to the demonstration. And I don't really have the time to spend with you. I need to be down there making sure that they fulfill their promises to us.
Fearless and holding power to account still, even after the coup. Lindsay, fun fact, you and I and Nima first met in the town of Abyei in South Sudan in 2011. It's a very unlikely way to meet and make friends.
Not an impression.
But, you know, a lot of work that first brought you to prominence was in surrounding Darfur. Sure. And given the Sudan in the news today, give us some of your thoughts about the toppling of...
Sure. Sudan was and is one of the hardest places I've ever worked. I covered the war and the genocide in Darfur for 6 straight years. So it was almost impossible to get in sometimes. I had to walk from Chad. I had to cross rivers, meet up with the rebels, go around on the back of their trucks, sleep in the desert. And then sometimes when I could get a visa, it took me months, and when I did get to Khartoum, I had to wait for months or maybe 35 days just to get a visa to go to Darfur. And then at that point, it was more time to even leave the guest house or wherever I was staying in Darfur to start reporting. And the same people who would give me the permission to report in the camps in Darfur would arrest me the next day when I would go to report and say, what are you doing here? As if they had never met me. So, I mean, the psychological, and so they break you down so much that you almost don't want to cover the story. And that is a very smart tactic, because to go there, you needed to prepare yourself emotionally on so many levels.
And I want to tell the story of Chol, but first let me go to Alexandra so we keep this moving and fair and balanced in a genuine sense. Venezuela, that's where you've done some extraordinary reporting, and you and your team just received an Overseas Press Club Award. Congratulations for your coverage of Latin America. Big deal. And you say, and this really struck me, that Venezuela is a country devoid of fact. Talk about the challenges of reporting in that kind of an environment where you are the one finding the facts in the face of overwhelming obstruction.
Sure. So Venezuela is one of the most catastrophic economic freefalls in modern history, and we don't really know how bad it is. So the government has stopped publishing almost every single indicator. So inflation, GDP, maternal mortality, malaria rates, emigration, homicide, it's not there anymore. And there are very few NGOs present, and until recently the UN didn't really have figures either. So it's essentially a black hole. Venezuela is also a very politicized story, and people around the world see it through an ideological spectrum often. So you have interested parties across the spectrum pushing their own narrative and their own estimates. So it forces you to try to be as rigorous a reporter as possible and drill down to the very seed of what's happening. So Venezuela's in hyperinflation. I could see that because every week my grocery bill was literally twice what it was the week before. And we knew people were leaving in droves because they would just disappear. People you'd see one day would suddenly leave. There were no more goodbye parties. People just fled. So, it forces you as a reporter to be more creative in the way you try to find ways to tell the story, drilling down into a community, or, profiling one single person that kind of exemplifies all that. But it's tricky because there's nothing to tell you you're wrong, because there's just no number out there.
But you try to take the individual story and make sure it's emblematic of a trend that you can measure as best you can.
Of course.
One way to fight the disinformation wars.
Right. So one instance, I took a bus with Venezuelan refugees for 2 weeks going from Venezuela to Chile, and we crossed 5 countries, and at every step of the way we were asking the border guards, the hawkers, the Venezuelan migrants, the bystanders, how many people have you seen go by? What kind of people? Where are they staying? Are there trafficking networks? And bit by bit, you start to accumulate a picture.
And that's a way to do it, but on the front lines. Lindsay, according to the UN High Commission on Refugees, we've got one person forcibly displaced from their home every 2 seconds. And all of you work in different frontiers of this problem. But one of the stories that you brought to life is that of a young person named Chol. Tell us his story.
So I think we can all say that we try never as journalists to insert ourselves in the story, but this was a case where in 2015 I was covering the Displaced series for the New York Times Magazine, and we followed 3 children who had been displaced by war. One South Sudanese boy, Chol, Hana, who was Syrian, and Oleg from Ukraine. And when I met Chol, he had been on the run for about 2 months. The government had come in and attacked his village in Lair in the middle of the night. His father was put in a hut and burned to death. And he and his grandmother and sister ran into the swamp and were hiding. And his 8 siblings and mother stayed behind. And he ran for his life and swam in the swamps. He was eating whatever they can find, whatever they can fish for. And eventually I met him in a place called Nial. And you can imagine he was incredibly traumatized. And I spent about a week with him, and it was hard to photograph him because, of course, you don't want to further their trauma, and I didn't want to ask him many questions. And so I spent time with him, and he had no idea if his mother was alive or dead, what happened to his siblings, because there are no phones in the places that he had come from. So about 6 months later, the story was published in the New York Times as a cover story, and Chol was actually on the cover. That's Chol. And about 6 months later, I got an assignment to go to Lair, where he was from. And I thought to myself, and that assignment was for Time magazine. And I thought to myself, maybe I can find his mother. And then I thought, okay, what are the chances of finding one woman in the entire area of Lair? So I went to Lair, and I started asking the ICRC, which is responsible for family reunification. And I said, you know, is there any chance I can find this woman? This is her full name, and this is her village. And they said, well, tomorrow there's a food distribution in Lair, and we're expecting 18,000 people because it was the first one in several months. There had been so much fighting. And they said, if she's alive, she will be there because she'll be hungry. And so we went to the food distribution, and literally people were coming from across the horizon. Old people were coming in wheelbarrows. People were crawling. It was unbelievable, the scene. And so, of course, I thought, I was photographing, and I thought, there's no way I'm going to find this woman. And so about an hour and a half into shooting, a man with the ICRC came to me and said, this is Chol's mother. And I said, I don't believe it. I was so skeptical, and I started asking her, where's your husband? Where's your son? How many kids do you have? And I asked her all of these questions. And suddenly, at some point, I realized, she said, my husband was put in a hut and set on fire, and one of my sons fled. I don't know if he's alive. He fled with my mother. And I realized, and I started weeping, I couldn't stop crying. And she's looking at me like, what is wrong with this girl, you know?
Why are you upset?
Yeah, why are you upset? It's my family. And so I had actually brought the New York Times Magazine in case I found her with her son on the cover. And I said, you know, can I come to your house tomorrow? And she said, sure. Well, there was one car in the entire area of Lair. And of course, I had to find the guy with the keys and run the car. So I went to her house, and I brought her the magazine. And all of Chol's siblings were sitting on this one thatched sort of bed. And Chol's mother and his great-grandmother, who was still alive, which was incredible. And I handed the magazine, and his mother and grandma, everyone just started crying. And they were weeping, and they said, he's alive, he's alive, he's alive. And then I said, I'm going to go to him. Do you want me to pass a message? Can I record a video to bring to your son? And so she sat up straight, and she said, don't come home. Stay in school and get educated.
That's... Yeah. You know, it's stories like that bring it home what the stakes of our work is. And I think what you all exemplify is not only the changing face of the force correspondent, but the way that you all can report stories in different ways with more of a connection to folks than maybe was typically accessible. And Nima, I want you to tell a story about the trafficking story you did in Nigeria, because it's an extraordinary example of that. But first I want to show a quick clip of it.
I want to say here, we have both sides here. We have both sides. We have kids. You know kids? You know kids? We have kids here. You just have them in your bag. So they don't. So we can't
can't travel without the contraception?
You get it from you. Get from not if you're not paying it, you get it from you.
As part of
Part of the journey.
Part of the journey, you'll get it first. Because the women are abused. What happens? The women are abused on the trip.
In Libya.
In Libya? What happens? They get pregnant.
That is telling you to have those things. It's not a guarantee. Sometimes, when you have to meet one of them, like see somebody and say, I would like to assist you. You know what it means. Don't tell me you don't know what I'm saying. Come on.
That is on the front lines. Tell us the context around that story.
We had done a story a few months before that in Libya where we were able to get access to the slave auctions of African migrants. And what really stayed with me after that story was that as much as that story had resonance, we had only really told half of the story because we hadn't told what happens to the women. And what happens to the women is that sexual slavery is part of the price of admission for the trip to Europe. So when you pay to be smuggled to Europe, you are, so that was a smuggler in that video there. They tell you, well, just in case you need to take contraception with you. Some women on the eastern routes coming out of Eritrea will take the contraceptive injection. On the western route, they will give you condoms, or they will try and get you to start taking the contraceptive pill earlier on. And it really stayed with us. I kept having these conversations with my boss, my wonderful boss, Debs Rayner, our head of news gathering. And it just felt like sexual violence against women is such an accepted part of the price of admission, of just being part of society, that even when you are in these extreme situations, sometimes you yourself have to take a moment to think, no, this is as appalling as men being auctioned off as slaves. This is sexual slavery, women being forced into brothels along that migrant route. And my amazing boss somehow managed to figure out a way to agree that we would traffic ourselves. I mean, literally just onto the bus. So we met him at the transport point, at a brothel, actually. And interestingly enough, because I am from Sudan and I am very much the product of a very uptight mother, that was one of the worst parts of this for me. I was having to explain to my mother that, yes, I got trafficked. Yes, we did all of that. Mama, I was in a brothel. I'm really sorry. Please forgive me. And she will be watching this, and she will be very, very, very disappointed. But there was no pretense. This is where he plied his trade from. And after you saw that, he pulled me aside. He physically pulled me away from my amazing producer, Lillian the Poster, who was also trafficking herself with me. Because I think he clearly had decided that I was the vulnerable one, because I was the idiot who was asking the stupid questions. And I think when you talk about the facing change of foreign correspondents, we talk often about being women, being minorities, but also I think we don't put as much of an emphasis on the mask that you wear as a woman, of being constantly underestimated, and how much that informs the work you do, and how much that actually becomes part of your toolkit. So he pulled me to one side and was holding onto my arms, and he said, listen, I think he thought that I was going to freak out. So he was like, listen, trust in God, it's all going to be fine, and if you are raped, don't struggle. And then he just let me go.
Thank you.
But you know, that's the norm. That happens when you think about it. We have no idea how many women have made that trip to Europe, but let's presume that there are millions, and that's not an exaggeration. Let's presume there are millions. So there are millions of women who have been raped multiple times en route to Europe, and yet when they get to Europe, or the women who come up the southern route across the Mexican border into America are also sexually assaulted. Yet when they get here, we are constantly trying to decide whether they are worthy of this life that they are coming here for.
Absolutely.
And that's the kind of story that you were able to bring that I think has just been, people have willfully wiped it from their minds. Alexander, when you're in Venezuela, I mean, you lived there for 4 years at a time of chaos and corruption. And recently, Secretary of State Pompeo just basically ordered the Russians to get out of the country. And I think one of many things that people don't adequately appreciate about what's going on the ground is Russian involvement in Venezuela. Tell people about what you've seen.
So, for a long time, Venezuela's big financial backer was China. They pumped in tens of billions of dollars in return for oil. But then they grew dissatisfied because their oil projects weren't taking off. Venezuela was slow in repaying them, and a lot of the Chinese nationals in Venezuela had been victims of crime. And that's when Russia came in, when the Venezuelan government was really desperate, needed cash, and only really had oil to offer. So through Russian oil company Rosneft, Russia started scooping up a lot of oil projects and extending loans, life-saving loans, to President Nicolas Maduro's government. In 2 occasions, sources have told us, Russia actually saved Venezuela from a default. So Russia has implicated itself hugely in the Venezuela crisis, defying the United States. Politically, they've proven a point, but economically, everything indicates it's been quite disastrous, actually, for Moscow, because their oil projects aren't doing well. There are constant blackouts. There's crime all over, the isolated areas where there are oil fields, and Venezuela just isn't producing any oil. But it's clearly a major political statement, and it's part of the bigger geopolitical battle over Venezuela.
Has it been purely an economic propping up, or has there been military assistance of that nature as well?
Well, recently, Russian plane came in with soldiers, and there's still a lot of mystery about exactly what they're doing, though everything appears to indicate that they're there to protect Maduro in case that the protests really swell up, or in case there's any kind of military attempt to bring down the regime.
His insurance is basically Russian troops. Venezuela, Sudan, these are ripped from the headlines, hotspots, but Lindsay, you just got back from an extraordinary reporting trip, even by your standards, where you watched the fall of ISIS in Syria.
My mother is in the audience, so
apologies in advance.
I actually was not intending to go to the front line in Syria. I was I'm doing a story on women in the military, and so my intention was to stay away from Baghouz, which was the final stronghold of ISIS, and to just work in Kurdish areas where there are many women fighters. And when I got there, the first interview I had was with the head of all the women in the country, fighting in the country. And she said, well, all my toughest women are in Baghouz fighting ISIS. And so I turned to my security advisor and I said, we might have to go to Baghouz. And he rolled his eyes and said, of course. And so we headed down. And what was interesting about Baghouz is, and I think that your colleague Dan Wiedemeyer was doing Wiedemann was doing incredible reporting, because the U.S. government was saying one thing, like, okay, ISIS is finished, but when we were on the front lines, we were getting shot at by ISIS, and their positions were 150 meters away. So I think that in and of itself, really tells the story of the importance of frontline journalism, because we were able to say, actually, that's not the case. There were thousands of women and children, and some men were surrendering almost daily toward the end of the fight, and it was an extraordinary scene. I mean, there were Americans, women from Finland, Britain, from all over, and pledging allegiance to ISIS. And those interviews were extraordinary and incredible, because now is the question, of course, with what do we do with these people? Because many countries are saying they won't take them back, but you can't keep 60,000 women and children in a prison, in an open prison in northern Syria.
That always raises the question when you're on the front lines is the what comes next. We focus so intensely on the moment, but ends are new beginnings, sometimes that are unwelcome. When we all met in Sudan, in South Sudan, it was the beginning of the Arab Spring. A lot of unintended consequences flowed out of that. Nima, as you look at what's happening to Sudan today, what's your sense of how things will play out with the military? Are they trying to protect Omar al-Bashir? How do you see this playing out?
Well, I think first and foremost, it's important to say that it's not just the Sudanese military that is trying to protect Omar al-Bashir. Omar al-Bashir has been a very good partner for the Americans. He's been key to counter-terror. In spite of being an indicted war criminal, the FBI signed a cooperation agreement just in November. So, we always think in these very kind of localized, it's these tin pot countries that do this, but we all exploit these strong men. Democracy is not good for business, and it's not good in terms of if you want a reliable world world order that you know that you can predict how your country will operate in. And that's why in that piece in Sudan, we made a point of saying, Omar al-Bashir is doing this to his people, and the US is still negotiating with him to normalize relations. So I think we have to think, those of us, we who are sitting here in the West, have to think, well, what is our culpability? We can't constantly be talking about, well, those people over there have a responsibility to not screw this up. They have a responsibility to understand what democracy means. We have a responsibility to understand what democracy means. We have a responsibility to demand of our lawmakers and our legislators that they uphold our values of what democracy means. And so Omar al-Bashir is an indicted war criminal. He is gone. The general that has stepped in for him is a designated war criminal by the US Treasury. It will be interesting to see whether the US does business with him, given that Sudan has been very key in the fight against ISIS and the spread of ISIS into Africa.
If you had to bet?
I would say it's business as usual. I mean, if you're going to continue negotiating to normalize relations with a government that is torturing its own people, then I would say you're going to go a long way, right?
Meet the new boss, same as the old boss. Lindsay, you've obviously worked primarily in your career overseas, but increasingly you're doing work here at home. And I wonder how the lens of being a foreign correspondent frames your work here at home.
Oh, that's interesting. I did start working back at home for the first time in about 20 years in the last few years. And I guess what I'm seeing is that so many of the same issues that I've covered overseas exist here, and I see them. I almost feel like a foreigner in my own country because I've been gone so long, and I actually can't believe what's happening. You know, what I witness here in the U.S., like the human rights violations, you know, the migrants and coming over and people coming to claim asylum. I mean, the child separation was heartbreaking. I mean, seeing these things happening in America, in a place where I've always believed that we as Americans have integrity and freedom and all of these things that people fight so hard for overseas, it's amazing to see that they don't really always exist here, depending on who you are.
It's that perspective that brings it into such cold contrast. I want to end with a question to all three of you, because at a time when America does seem to be turning inward, I want each of you to make the case of why it's so vital to have international reporting remain on the front pages, keeping you on the front lines, and it's something that Americans need to pay attention to. Alexander, let me start with you.
I mean, I think it's absolutely crucial, right? It's the way we understand what's happening in our own countries. When, you know, just to give an example, I used to think that things like central banks and institutions were a little bit boring. But then when you're in Venezuela and you see, you know, technocrats being fired from the central bank, numbers being fiddled, and then, you know, discontinue it entirely, and institutions being broken down, you start to realize just how catastrophic that process is. And I think that makes you much more aware. And, you know, in my case, I'm Swiss American, you know, grateful and lucky that I lived and grew up in countries where those institutions were, at least to an extent, you know, safeguarded and willing to fight for them. And I think it's not the only role that, you know, learning about the world brings, but it helps put into perspective what you have and why it's important to fight for it.
So Herman Cain for the Fed. Nima.
I would, well, from a completely idealistic perspective, I would say it speaks to who we are as a people. What are we prepared to tolerate? What are we prepared to allow to happen in this world? And if you're prepared to tolerate it abroad, then eventually you will be prepared to tolerate it back home. And it will come back to you.
So important. Lindsay?
I guess what I realized when I first started working abroad is how so many countries look to the United States to help sort of perpetuate freedom, to help make sure that the things that they want in their own countries, they sort of look at us as a police officer overseas. And I never really realized that growing up here. And so I think it's very important to hold not only other leaders accountable for their actions, but our own president and our own country accountable for our actions.
Ladies and gentlemen, let's thank these extraordinary journalists on the front lines. Thank you for what you do every day.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
Susan Rice. I know. Okay, everyone, we have a lot to get to with Susan. First, London and Sudan, a lot going on today. Tell us why we care.
Well, first of all, if you're in my business, it's a rare day when you wake up and there are two good news stories right off the bat. So Assange leaving or being removed from the embassy and hopefully coming to face justice in the United States is really good for the United States and really good for the world. So that's point one. Chalk it up for a good day. And then secondly, in Sudan, which you've been talking about, to see Omar Bashir, who for 30 years has tormented the people of Sudan from Darfur to Khartoum, removed from power is also a good thing. Now the concern is the military's taken over, and a coup to replace a coup is not inherently a good thing. So there needs to be a genuine and swift transition. And the promise that the people of Sudan have waited so long for to actually have the opportunity to determine their own destiny. So the jury is definitely out, but today's a better day than yesterday in Sudan as well. Now, would that we could say the same thing here in the United States.
We're going to get to that. So most of you, all of you now know that Susan and I spent a lot of time together in the White House. One of my favorite things to do was travel the world with her. And when we would travel the world together, oftentimes the National Security Advisor and the Deputy Chief of Staff for Operations, well, we were considered the continuity of government. So if anything terrible happened while we were in a foreign country with Barack Obama, Susan and I were in charge. And you could rest assured that everything would be handled properly. Susan, do you think this administration knows exactly what they're doing?
Not so sure. Not so sure. You know, imagine you're in an overseas venue, you're in a motorcade, as Alyssa and I were, and the people in that vehicle that she called Control, as it's known, really do have an enormous amount of responsibility, along with the military aides to the president and Secret Service, etc. And even if you assume in this administration that the people who are riding in that same vehicle as we did had a sense of how to behave and proper protocols, at the end of the day, we were blessed to know that the commander-in-chief had his head on straight and was going to make calm, rational, thoughtful judgments in a crisis. And I think the concern is, the real question is what would be happening up in the vehicle known as the Beast, which is the president's car in any motorcade.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Also, just worth noting that when Susan and I were the two people in control, we were probably the first time two women were ever in charge of the continuity of the government. So, score one for Barack Obama for making that happen. Susan, what keeps you up at night? Let's start that
running
up.
Clock
I
here.
know. Don't worry, I've got my eye on the clock. We'll get to everything.
Well, there are subjects and issues that keep me up at night, but quite honestly, I worry also a lot about the quality of decision making. Mm-hmm. And, you know, there are reasons why in the national security world we have processes. We have a National Security Council. We have a Principals Committee and a Deputies Committee that spend hours carefully considering all angles of the most difficult issues and making thoughtful, informed recommendations to the president, who is meant to carefully study the options, analyze the information, and come to a thoughtful, rational decision. And what is so broken is not just at the very top, which is self-evidently broken, but the process is broken. There are very few principals committees meetings anymore. That's the meeting that I used to chair as National Security Advisor with my cabinet-level counterparts on everything from North Korea to Iran to Ebola, you name it.
Everything.
And, you know, we would have 2 to 3 such meetings a week, and that was following a great deal of preparatory work done at the deputies level, one below, and at the working level throughout government. And now it's quite obvious that decisions are made not only by tweet on the fly, but that beneath that, there has not been a process to consider the ramifications of critical decisions. And so you have things like the president saying one thing one day on North Korea and the Treasury Department saying another thing and the president contradicting him the subsequent day. And that in a case where we're dealing with an adversary that ought to be taken quite seriously. And so that's indicative of the process being broken. And so I worry a lot that when you think about it, there have been very few exogenous crises that have hit this administration, thankfully.
I just knocked wood for us.
Yeah, knock wood for all of us, because by this time, and certainly in the Obama administration, and I think in most previous administrations, as luck would have it, something or many things had happened that were curveballs coming at us from left field. Most of the challenges this administration has faced has frankly been challenges of their own creation. Yep. But when and if, as is inevitable, a major crisis hits, I worry a great deal that the systems aren't in place, the processes aren't in place, the muscle memory's not in place for the kind of thoughtful decision-making that we need.
And one of the things that I have noticed and that I've talked about, the way that you can tell how broken the process is the number of leaks that come out of the administration. Because one of the things that Susan and I can tell you, we did not have many leaks because of the very processes and the Deputies Committee and Principals Committee that you hear her talk about, because everybody had thoughtful consideration. If they didn't get their way, they had been heard. And now that is not what's happening. Another sort of issue that is out there that I don't know if everyone understands entirely how impactful it is, the lack of confirmed cabinet secretaries and appointees, specifically in the Department of Homeland Security. Why is that bad?
Because we need a secure homeland, and it doesn't. The Department of Homeland Security is one of the largest, most sprawling, complex bureaucracies in the U.S. government. And you all know it deals with everything from cybersecurity to terrorism to the border. And to have so many key positions vacant or with actings is quite disconcerting. And then recall that we also have an acting Secretary of Defense for now over 100 days. We have no UN ambassador.
Yeah.
I mean, you can go down the list of half the cabinet, it seems, is vacant, or with acting individuals who don't have the security and the stature, security of position or the stature to be as effective as we need them to be. So this is, you know, I don't know if it's part of the deconstruction of the administrative state, right, or what this is, but whether you're looking at the State Department where there are many vacancies and no nominees, or our ambassadorial ranks, there seems to be a deliberate disinterest in having human beings run the government.
It's a bummer. Don't get me started. Susan knows how I feel about that. When you see the breakdown of process, are there crises in the past 2 years that you feel the U.S. was late to the game on because of the chaos in the internal NSC process?
Yes, and I'll give you a couple of examples, but more than late to the game, there are just a whole range of issues that it seems that the government is not even engaged on.
Right.
I mean, if you think about it, what is this administration focused on in foreign policy? North Korea, good. Not good outcome, but good that they're paying attention. Iran, to which I think is getting outsized attention. And China, I guess, to the extent that we're, you know, engaged in a trade war with a dubious outcome. But we're not engaged on a constructive and regular basis with our European partners. We're not engaged in the outcomes in the rest of the Middle East, not to mention Africa, Latin America, with the exception of Venezuela, Southeast Asia. There's whole swaths of the world that seem to be not worthy of the time and attention of senior American officials, which is not, frankly, a luxury the United States has when you at least aim to be the global leader. And so, you know, there are a whole lot of things that aren't getting attention. But, you know, interestingly, in recent weeks, I've been struck by the floods in Mozambique and the cholera outbreak in Mozambique. I don't know, Mozambique, by the way, Zimbabwe and Malawi. I don't know if that's on many people's radar screens, but thousands of people were lost in floods that were foreseen and actually replicated a situation that happened in the year 2000, back when I was in the Clinton administration working on Africa. In 2000, the United States military deployed to southern Africa and had helicopters picking victims off of the roofs of huts and out of trees in southern Africa. And that happened because the deputies and the principals got together, sat around the table in the Situation Room, and decided that this was a priority. We were able to move quickly. We were able to save lives. Obviously, that level of military engagement was not replicated this time. Although to the credit of the administration and to Africa Command, they did ferry in supplies and the like. Another example is the Ebola epidemic. Many of you may not even know that the world's second worst Ebola outbreak is now raging in eastern Congo, and in an even more difficult context than the one we faced in 2014. And yet, back in 2014, it was the United States, under President Obama's leadership, that rallied the world to contain that epidemic and limit the loss of life. And all of these issues seem to be falling off the table or don't even hit the table in this administration. And it's part of the reason why the world is looking at the United States and wondering where we've gone.
Susan, we have, you specifically, colleagues from your days in the NSC, John Brennan, who was in the White House, became CIA director, Jim Clapper, director of national intelligence. These are apolitical people who have historically held apolitical positions, who now in this administration have felt compelled to speak out about what they're seeing and why it's wrong. Do you think that do you think that that's right? And do you think that the intelligence community pays a price for them having to speak out in this way?
Well, I know John Brennan and Jim Clapper extremely well. We spent more hours than I can count working on some of the most difficult issues together, and I count them both as friends. But above all, I count them as extraordinary patriots and professionals who've given their careers to serving this country, apolitically and with extreme dedication. And the fact that they have been attacked and vilified, like many of us, for our service in prior administrations, I think is a damn shame, and it doesn't at all do them the service and the justice that they deserve. They're speaking out because they are patriots and professionals, and because they are profoundly uncomfortable with the direction that we're heading and the vilification of the intelligence community and law enforcement. And they're right to speak out. And, you know, if anything is doing damage to our intelligence community and to our law enforcement, it's having a commander-in-chief that denigrates them on a daily basis.
Susan, do you think that that the United States still holds the position in the world that it held, let's say, like 10 years ago?
No.
Okay, that was easy.
No.
What global leaders do you think have risen to the challenge, the occasion, as our foreign policy has become inconsistent?
Well, I think, first of all, you know, if you look around the world, there are many places where the internal dynamics in countries that were once reliable and steady have shifted. And so, obviously, we're not the only place where things are a little inconsistent or funky. Yes, that's a good word for it. But I think in this context, Angela Merkel of Germany has emerged as a steady, reliable, thoughtful, responsible leader. And some have dubbed her the leader of the free world, and I don't think that's a misplaced characterization at the moment. But our standing in the world has suffered not only relative to 10 years ago, but relative to 2 years ago.
I was being generous.
I know you were, but I want to make that distinction because the world has long looked to the United States to lead with respect to our values, to lead with respect to our interests, to bring coalitions together, whether it's to fight ISIS or to put pressure on Russia after its invasion of Ukraine or to deal with the Ebola epidemic. We lead, we bring countries together, and we speak in defense of human rights, in defense of freedom of the press and our core values. And all of that has changed. Not only are we not leading, not only have we jettisoned our values, but we are actually modeling the opposite behavior. And instead of therefore being a steady, reliable, predictable leader on the world stage, we are actually now an exporter of instability.
Right.
And that's a horrible thing to have to say. And I think it's not only caused us to lose our standing and our influence, which redounds to the detriment of our security, but we should not assume that it will be quick or easy to regain what's been lost.
That's what I was
going to
ask.
be really hard. And I think it'll be a while, even with the best effort and the best leadership, before the world can take a deep breath and have some degree of confidence that we're not going to pull this trick on them again.
Yeah. Whew. Since I think all of us know the news is entirely dominated by 2020 and Trump's tweets and things that the administration wants us to pay attention to, which are literally the opposite of what we should be paying attention to. So what are a few things that are happening in the world that you think people don't have their eyes trained on, that we need to be careful of and need to be paying attention to?
It's a long list, but let me just give you a couple of examples. You will recall that it wasn't many weeks ago that India and Pakistan were on the verge of a hot war. Two nuclear-armed powers that the United States and the world have long been extremely worried about and have long sought to diffuse tension between when that tension arises. Some of you are going to be old enough to remember back in the Clinton years where things heated up very much, and the President of the United States was on the phone, engaged with the leadership of both countries very actively, trying to diffuse a potential crisis. Did we see anything approaching that? Not even the President or the Secretary of State, much less others at a lower level, trying to prevent the prospect of what could be one of the most catastrophic developments that any of us can imagine. Now, thankfully, the leaders in both countries were able to diffuse the situation. But it isn't always thus, and there are many places around the world where the degree of attention that the United States would normally devote to a situation is lacking. Let me give you another place where it's not that our attention is lacking, but I think when I say our attention, the United States government's attention, but I think perhaps public attention is lacking, and that's Afghanistan, where after 17 years of U.S. and NATO involvement, Americans have gotten tired and moved on, but we still have nearly 15,000 American servicemen and women on the ground in very difficult and dangerous situations. There is an effort on the part of the administration to try to engage in a dialogue with the Taliban and bring the Afghan government together with the Taliban. And that's the right kind of diplomacy that we should be doing more of elsewhere, even if it hasn't yet yielded concrete results. But the American people, I think, have gone to sleep on certain issues that we can't afford to. And when we're constantly being bombarded by the insanity of the day, blowing up our phones, literally, it's very hard to look beyond our immediate borders and beyond the most hot crises around the world and pay attention to the things that matter in far-flung parts of the world and here inside our own country. 3 black churches burned in Louisiana, it's barely a beat. That's an example.
Do you ever get a little hot when you think about the standards that we were held to? And, did Barack Obama have to give you your security clearance, or did you do your clearance the old-fashioned way? And why, just quickly, why for everyone is it so bad to circumvent the historical process of security clearance? You have no idea what they did to us.
3 times a week at least I wake up and say, can you imagine if we had done this?
Can you imagine?
Can you imagine? Anyway, there's no point in dwelling on that. The security clearance thing is mind-boggling. There is a reason that everybody in the White House, from those that literally take out the trash and take the classified material and put it in from the burn bag into the incinerator, up to the President of the United States, need to have a security clearance. They are in contact with, overhearing conversations about dealing with documents that relate to the most sensitive information we have. And the notion that the traditional, responsible, professional process for deciding if a person merits a security clearance has been, in over 25 cases, as reported, completely been blown off. Not just for the president's son-in-law, but for low-level people. Why? And the costs of that are extraordinary. And again, you know, had we...
I can't.
Can you imagine?
No, I get really upset thinking about it because I personally had a lot of issues with my clearance because I smoked a little weed. That now, and I was so ashamed. I was on like probation. I had to get drug tested for a year. And now I see Jared Kushner, who's on WhatsApp with Mohammed bin Salah, and I'm just like, cool, that's awesome. Seriously. Yeah, we really held ourselves to a standard. Okay, so this is our last question for Susan. Some of you, I'm sure, if you're on Twitter or just read a paper, have seen a sort of call from the people for Susan to run for the United States Senate in Maine. And so, I mean, I have been waiting to make my plans until Susan makes up her mind about what she's going to do in 2020. And so she has made up her mind. And Susan, what are you going to do?
I've made up my mind. Well, thanks, Alyssa.
I mean, I wasn't...
Jeez. I think like a lot of people, I was deeply disappointed when Susan Collins decided to vote for Brett Kavanaugh.
You mean when she said that he said Roe v. Wade was settled law?
Right.
You mean then?
Then.
Cool.
It felt like a betrayal, frankly, to all women. And it made me think very seriously about whether I ought to run for Senate in 2020. And I did. And I've done some homework, and I've spent a lot of time thinking and talking about it with my family. You know, I love Maine. My family has deep roots in Maine that go back more than 100 years. And we've owned a home there for many years. And I really believe that the state of Maine deserves the best possible leadership in the Senate. But I've given this a lot of thought, and in the course of weighing it all, I've decided with my family that the timing really isn't right for us. Sorry.
I know.
No, but I have, you know, I got to explain. I've got, no, listen up. I've got a daughter going into her junior year in high school in Washington. And this is not the time to move ourselves full-time up to Maine and to put my family through the stresses of a campaign. I don't rule out running for office in the future.
Okay, good.
I don't rule that out at all, in Maine or beyond. But after all my family has done to support me, as much as they have sacrificed over many years to enable me to serve as I have, I've got to put them first.
Hear you. I love you for that. But we are going to go places in 2020,
we're going
though.
places. Look,
I
first
mean,
of all,
you can't stop us.
we're going to support the Democratic nominee in
Yes,
the state
we
of
are,
Maine.
no matter who it is.
And then we're going to bust our behinds to help the right people win in 2020.
Right.
Across the board. You and I are going to...
We're going to do it, and then when Susan decides to run for president someday, I will be her campaign manager. You heard it here first.
Amen!
That's it. We're done. Thank you.
Here at the Birthday Party Project, we bring joy and magic to children experiencing homelessness. Every single month, we throw a big themed birthday bash, whether it is a county fair theme or it's Monster Mash with DJs. We want kids and families to experience something that they've never experienced before. We like to say that our parties are so much more than a celebration, that they are a loud exclamation point that children matter.
On your birthday, it's a very important thing to know that people are out there and supporting you. When I was in the homeless shelter, being a bit older than most kids who are there, I really understood the gravity of the situation. They give me a reason to keep going and try to make something out of myself bigger than what I've always known. I went from being homeless to studying computer science at Southern Methodist University.
So much of innovation happens at the ground level. When we start to impact our community, that's where the change really happens. And then it starts to build and grow from there. And how amazing is it that Toyota recognizes that too? I am proof that saying yes can create ripple effects far beyond our imaginations. And I'm so grateful for that.
Hi, everyone. My name is Antonia Hilton. I'm a civil rights correspondent for Vice News Tonight on HBO. And I am so excited, thank you. I am so excited to be here today and to be in conversation with one of our mothers of invention, Paige Chenault. And we're also here with Pamela Brazier. She runs a women's shelter as part of the program Women in Need. Thank you both for being here.
I know. Yeah.
Before we dive right into conversation, I want to point something out really quick, which is that in just New York City alone, 21,000 children are going to go to sleep tonight in our homeless shelters. That's just here in New York. And that's the local scale of things, right? And so as we have this conversation, I want you to keep those children in mind as we talk about some of the solutions designed to serve them. Paige, first question for you. In the video, we hear from a young man named Taurus. Can you tell us a little bit more about his story and the impact your team had on his life and his journey to college?
So 2 Septembers ago, our birthday enthusiasts, that's what we call our volunteers, had the privilege of celebrating an 18-year-old boy's birthday. His name is Taurus. Taurus got a $30 value Visa gift card, and as he opened it, he exclaimed, "I can use this for my books in college." And in that moment, we realized that we could do something for this child beyond this $30 value gift card. So our enthusiast at the time came to our team and said, "This kid's got something. He's exceptional. He's bright. He's the oldest of 3 siblings, and he's going places. What can we do to help him?" So we rallied our resources, our birthday enthusiasts. We do believe in being the bridge in our community. So we just reached out to folks. What can you do? How can you help us? This kid is in community college, making a 4.6 in community college at 18 years old while living in a homeless shelter. Let's help him get to the next level. I am so proud to say that in May of this year, he will complete his first year at Southern Methodist University with a 4-point GPA.
Yeah. So how do you take that success case and replicate it?
You know what? It's about getting to know people. It's about asking the next question. It's not just stopping at "Happy birthday, we're so glad to celebrate you." It's "Tell me more about you." It's taking the time to unpack and discover how, what other people's dreams are, and then how we can use our gifts and talents to do something about that.
And Pamela, I have a question for you. You know, at first when you hear about the Birthday Party Project, you could see someone thinking, a birthday party is a frivolous thing when you think of the list of needs that a homeless child might have. What possible impact can a birthday party have on the lives of homeless families?
The Birthday Party Project is an amazing program. We're so lucky to have it at WIN. When a family comes into shelter, they are interacting with so many different variables, so many different people, from the case managers to income building specialists to the child care program that we have on site. The important thing is that there has to be a time where children can just be children and moms can just celebrate their children's birthdays. We're constantly saying that your savings is your rent money. And when the Birthday Party Project comes on site, mom doesn't have to worry about the cake, the gift, or the celebration. They know that there's going to be that DJ. They know there's going to be face painting. They know that this room is going to transform into a place that it's going to look like whatever the theme is for that month. And they're consistent about the theme. Those groups are so responsible and reliable. We had a snowstorm November, out of nowhere. And we were kind of like, oh, they're not coming. Did they cancel yet? No, they didn't cancel yet. I'm putting on my coat. Oh, they're going to cancel. They came in. I took off my coat, and we partied like rock stars. They're an amazing group. And it makes a huge difference in the lives of children to just be able to celebrate their birthdays. And for moms to be able to do that, and just for a minute, not think about the trauma, not think about the experiences they have about coming into shelter in the first place. It's one of the great times to just have fun.
Yeah, thank you. So spell it out for me. How exactly do the two of you collaborate together?
Easy. Women in Need makes it really easy for our team at the Birthday Party Project. They provide the best care for the families that they are serving and allow us to be consistent coming into the agency every single month. So whether it's the fourth Wednesday of the month, the second Tuesday of the month, we show up on time, and they're there welcoming us and greeting us. And the best part for us is that we get to have conversations about what kids are we celebrating, any special needs, like is there anything that we need to consider when we're coming in, what gifts do they want? Let's get them something that they want for their birthday. It's been incredible to see how two different organizations can really come together and be better together.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. That's right. From our perspective, I think that when we think about families coming into shelter, the trauma that they are experiencing from the time that they wake up, we don't even realize that the majority of our families come in, mom is already working, right? Mm-hmm. Mom just does not have enough money. When you have over half of our ladies working, to be able to make ends meet coming into shelter. And I think a lot of times when you have groups that come in, volunteers that are giving only their time, that are coming in to actually just make our families just the normalcy of it, right? All of us who have, children and nieces and nephews, we celebrate birthdays all the time. And it should not be such an expense that someone has to worry about, I can't celebrate my child's birthday because I don't have the money, because I'm saving to move, because I just don't have enough. And so when Birthday Party Project comes, it's just like an example of how our children in shelter can just be like every other child in the community in the world. It's perfect.
So this is a kind of big question, and I'm sure you both could write a whole dissertation on it. But can you tell us just about homelessness in America at this moment and how we got here?
It's a really big question. It is a very deep question, but this is what I know to be true from our experience, is that there is such a stigma associated with homelessness. And what you and I in 2019 might think about homelessness is completely inaccurate. Homelessness looks like sex trafficking rehabilitation programs, women that are fleeing abusers from domestic violence, people that are working 2 jobs but cannot afford a home. There are people that are, medical bills that have taken them out of their homes. Here we are thinking that they are perhaps lazy or incompetent or don't want any help, and I have found that that is completely untrue, and the opposite of that is actually true. And it's so true. Don't you think that there's so many people that we meet from Women in Need that are working?
Absolutely. Half of our women come in and they're already working. They just can't afford to maintain rent without assistance, on top of food, on top of transportation, and we live in the most expensive city in New York, right?
And affordable housing. There's such a lack of affordable housing.
There's just not enough. And so this becomes, a huge part of why Families are still in shelter and staying in shelter longer. Even with all the supports that are put in place to kind of really wrap around families to be able to do this, not having the money for rent is a huge issue.
Yeah. So rapid fire with our last little bit of time. What are some of the few things people in this room right now could do to make an impact in the lives of kids experiencing homelessness?
Just treat people with dignity. Look them in the eyes and ask them questions. Let them feel known and seen and valued. Just as simple as that.
That's right. And without judgment and without making those assumptions that people just really don't want to be their best.
That's right.
And that people wake up in the morning thinking, I want to be homeless. It's really about people waking up and realizing, I'm going to be evicted today. Moms with children, or realizing today's the day I'm going to leave my abuser, right? Those are huge decisions that have to be made. And moms do this with kids every day.
That's right. Well, and also just come throw parties with us at the birthday party project, right? That's
right.
the easiest way to
Volunteer and
impact
donate.
children.
Waiting for my invite in the mail right now.
That's right. That's right.
Thank you both so much, Paige and Pamela, and congratulations on the amazing work that you're doing every day.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Dinali before you worry, Munhemene Uncle Luzori in the Wale, Nellis Luzori Nesli Karani, Siling Kafuna. Sunan then petty problem with it.
We are often treated as untouchable during our periods.
नाम भी नहीं सुना नाम भी तुम्हारा नहीं सुना पता ही नहीं कैसे करके कपड़ा सा भी यूज कर
It's not easy because a woman is not supposed to talk in front of men in this community. But I knew fighting female genital mutilation, it takes time.
The strategy we use is education.
I want the girls of next generation to be free of superstitious beliefs that isolate and humiliate them.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Dr. Jennifer Ashton. These are hard acts to follow. It's been an incredible day. This will be an incredible panel. This week, as many of you know, New York announced a state of emergency due to a measles outbreak. And largely because of anti-vaccination fears, measles infections are spiking across this country. And this really shows us that no matter where we are in the world, what we believe, our feelings about health and medicine and science really does have a significant impact on our health outcomes. And we know, and we've seen, that health emergencies unfortunately tend to disproportionately affect women and girls. So today I'm honored to moderate this panel about taboos, traditions in the past, present, and future. With me today are Shalini, Elizabeth, Gunit, and Edna, real pioneers for women's health around the world. And I think you're going to be very, very impressed with what they have to say. So Elizabeth, I'd like to start with you. As a senior advisor to the UN Women, you've seen firsthand how gender roles and gender inequality around the world have a very real impact on the health and lives of women. Whether that's through sexual or domestic violence, which we hear more about, or child marriage, which has direct consequences to health, often leading to severe complications in pregnancy and death for these girls and young women. Gender really is a linchpin in many ways for the safety and health of women. Now, you grew up in Zimbabwe.
Indeed.
And you mentioned backstage that it's unusual for you to be wearing white. You said you should be wearing more colorful, that you look beautiful. So can you describe for us a way that you personally have seen women's health affected by gender inequality and connect those dots for us?
Yes, so I grew up in a small village in Zimbabwe, and I was raised by my grandmother. And there was a very interesting dynamic that I saw where I saw women do all the hard work and men make all the important decisions. It was the men who decided whether the woman should go and seek medical help. It was the men who decided how many children the family ought to have. It was a man who decided, again, it was during the era of the HIV/AIDS pandemic in my own country in Zimbabwe. And again, I saw women be deprived of access to even testing as well as medication. But I think for me, the biggest takeaway is after I left Africa, I realized this was not an issue for women in Africa. It was a universal issue. Because everywhere, in most countries around the world, including here in the US, these challenges are so prominent. Reproductive health is a questionable thing that continues to be debated, again, without even taking into account what the woman herself needs. We have seen maternal mortality continue to be a big issue, including here in the US. So for me, I think the biggest takeaway is that there is so much that needs to be done in terms of healthcare for women, because there is this gender dimension that makes it much more difficult for women to access services, but also to exercise their rights to access those services.
Absolutely. And Edna, as the former First Lady of Somalia, when you retired from your position with the World Health Organization, you obviously didn't like having a lot of free time, so you started a maternity hospital in Somalia, which has been so transformative in that community. But you've also been a very powerful and vocal advocate against female genital mutilation in Somalia and have made incredible strides to reducing that. But it has been a very slow process. Why do you think those communities are so resistant to changing that practice?
Well, thank you very much. Well, first of all, I come from Somaliland, so there is that slight confusion between Somalia and former British Somaliland Protectorate. I retired from the UN after a long career, and at a time when my country had just emerged from a long civil war, everything was destroyed. People had spent 10, 11 years in civil war, and mostly in refugee camps. And the only things that people can hold on to is their tradition, good or bad. Some cultures, some traditions are good. But then because of the likelihood of rape and violence against women, the issue of female genital mutilation or female circumcision or infibulation became reinstated into the practice of the community as a way of protecting their daughters from rape. So whatever gains we had made in the past to convince people to abandon the practice, after the war, we found that people had picked up their habit again. They're resistant to it because nobody's had time to tell them any different. It took me a long time for me to find out that female circumcision was not a religious requirement. Yeah. It was a cultural, traditional practice. Many Islamic communities do not circumcise their daughters. And it was a tradition that had lasted for so long, for centuries and for generations, that they held on to it. So when one tries to convince the population about the harmful effects of the practice, it becomes a very difficult subject to introduce. You're talking about genitals, you're talking about private parts of the woman you don't normally talk about. So in itself, it's a taboo subject. So you need to bring in your credibility. You need to bring in the confidence that the people have in you. You need to speak the language that the people can tolerate to listen to. You speak about hemorrhage. Everybody knows that. Infections, pain, suffering, inability to conceive because of all the pelvic inflammation that happens in the girl. These become the way that you can introduce the subject. Yes, body integrity is good. But my grandmother would understand that. You would understand about the rights of women to their own body. My grandmother would understand that. But when I talk about bleeding, when I talk about hemorrhage, when I talk about inability to pass urine like everybody else, she will be able to relate to that and listen to me. So one needs to be convincing, credible, and also approach it in a way that you can win, convince, gain credibility in what you're doing. For instance, I'm a midwife. I go to work in the morning. I need to get a baby out from a part of the body that has been very damaged and mutilated. Everybody understands that I need to cut, I need to suture. That woman bleeds, she has pain. Every woman who's had a baby has gone through it. So these are the ways that you go, you approach, or you begin to speak about these problems. And then each thing also becomes reinforced by the level of education of the audience you're speaking to. And an audience that I target very strongly is the father. The father is the head of the family. So why turn your back and say, oh, this is a woman's issue, but she is your daughter. You have the right and the responsibility to protect your daughter. So that's how we try to approach it. And luckily, for the first time, we're seeing a dip. 25% of the women who deliver in my hospital have only had the mild, I won't say only the mild, have had the type 1 or type 2. And none of it can be minimized to be described as mild. It shouldn't happen. But at least the most severe form is beginning to be abandoned.
And that's a real step in the right direction, obviously. And what you just mentioned about trust is a perfect segue to my question for Shalini. In 2014, you worked on the Ebola response in West Africa. We just heard about it recently in a previous panel. There was recent news just a couple of days ago about record cases right now in the DRC. Part of the issue that I'd like you to speak to us about is mistrust, distrust between the community there and the healthcare providers on the ground who are trying to address, treat, and prevent and curtail this epidemic. So speak to us a little bit about that if you could.
Yeah, absolutely. Every epidemic has its own social, cultural, political, economic context. But what's a common thread, what's remarkable to me from the experience that I had during the Ebola crisis in 2014 and seeing what is happening now is the common thread. One common thread is this mistrust of the communities, and that resistance from the communities, that disbelief that the disease is real, the many myths and stories that spread around patients that were being kidnapped, their organs were being stolen, all these myths. All of that resistance was a big part, probably the most significant part of why it took us so long to gain traction in West Africa and why today in DRC there is a crisis, and these are not my words, but of the professionals who are there right now, that it is a disaster and still out of control. The important thing, though, is when we talk about mistrust of communities, it's often pretty easy to think about it as, oh, they have beliefs and they don't trust institutions, and so we need to give them information, etc. But mistrust goes both ways. It's not just the community's mistrust in the institutions and experts. It's the experts' mistrust in them and their ability to help us design solutions, help us find ways to tackle the problem. And we often go in with the best intentions, saying we have the answer, let's roll this out. And that not kind of stopping to listen and understand, why do people believe what they believe? Who will they be willing to listen to? What will make them change their behavior, etc., is really important. So trust goes both ways.
I love that. Quickly, Elizabeth, when you launched the He for She movement,
Yes.
Edna referenced the fathers in the delivery room. This targeted men in these communities. You received pushback. Why do you think that was? And give us the update on how that is going.
No, so actually that was a very interesting take, because the pushback wasn't from men, surprisingly. Actually, the pushback was mostly from women. And I can also understand the pushback. I think most women felt that men were the problem. You know, men continue to hold women back. And I had to argue, and again, back to the thing that I said before, that I saw that the power brokers continue to be men across all levels of society. So you can't really fix the problem if the people that are, you know, sort of creating some of this discomfort are not engaged in the conversation. But there was a pushback with women. And again, I think the important thing for us was to do exactly what you said, which was, how do you create a movement and really put the ownership in the hands of the people with the privilege, which was men, to say, here's what you can do to become part of the solution, to become part of the change. And we literally saw in 5 days, at least one man in every single country in the world who had committed to the He for She movement. But for me, what was interesting is this idea that we didn't tell the men what to do beyond simply saying, this is a movement, it's for you, and you can be a change agent, and you can be part of the solution. But we saw men become very creative. A man in my own country in Zimbabwe started a husband school. He literally went around his village. He handpicked all the men that were abusive to their wives and said, underneath this tree, every Saturday, I'm going to teach you to become a better father and a better husband. And it was really, really remarkable. Another very quick story with Malawi. Malawi is one of the countries that's working with the He for She movement. The president made a commitment. Again, we said to him, you will know what the issues are for your own country. You will know how to solve for those issues. If sustainability is a component to the work we do as UN Women, which it is, we have to actually empower the local communities. And he decided that he was going to end child marriage. He then ended up, outlawing child marriage under the age of 18 as part of his He for She commitment. It's now illegal in Malawi. But the big story for me is what happened at the community level, where you saw the male chiefs start to join hands with the female chiefs who had been advocating to end child marriage for a very long time, but it was very difficult because the power brokers are still the men in those communities. And working together, one of our really sort of heartwarming story is that in the past 12 months, we saw the chiefs working together annulling 20,000 child marriages, and those girls are now back in school. That's how you engage the community.
Gunit, we saw a clip from your incredible documentary, Period, End of Sentence, in our introduction video. And congratulations on winning an Academy Award. Thank you. It has been so powerful in changing a global conversation about a basic bodily function, menstruation, not just in India, but again, around the world. I brought something, not for you, but for this audience and for people watching around the world. And this is an idea for your next film, because I know it was really about the pad movement, but I want to ask people watching, if this makes you uncomfortable here, now I'm a gynecologist, so this is my area, this is my jam. Gunit, why did you set about making the film about menstruation, and how have you seen this dialogue change, not just locally and socially, but politically as well?
It's been an amazing journey of putting menstruation and a movie on menstruation on the map. Thanks to Academy and to Netflix, we have an Oscar for a film on menstruation. Thank you.
Did you ever think that was going to happen?
Actually, no. We set out, in fact, the girls from Oakwood School set out to make this, and their English teacher set out to make this, trying to raise more money for one more pad machine that we can donate. And somewhere down the line, they thought that while we are doing bake sales and yogathons to raise one pad machine, why don't we also document the process of installing that and seeing what happens? It led to a revolution that got captured in the observatory documentary that we put together, I mean, now it's just cool to hang out with us.
As it should be.
So I mean it politically, because the girls from Hapur, they're being awarded by the local ministers because elections are on, and the conversation about periods is comfortably happening from them lying and saying that we are setting up Huggies diaper unit. When they started the pad project, when they started the pad machines, they could not tell their partners and husbands what they were actually putting in their own houses. So they said we are making babies' diapers, and that is also part of the movie. It got captured as we interviewed the men, to then saying that, you know, we are setting up pad projects, and this is what we do, and we sell this. It's needed as a basic hygiene every month for everyone. So the men are curious and are proud to be associated with it. We saw that shift happen, at least in Hapur, in the village that we worked in, with the help of the NGO Action India in Hapur. But the conversation is wide, and it's pan-India, and it's on front paper of every newspaper, of every channel, and it's normalizing. I mean, it's monthly, so.
Congratulations. Wow. Edna, I want everyone to take a look at this picture because I think, as they say, a picture is worth 1,000 words. It's from one of your centers of an all-female surgical team. And I think that it's vital as we talk about these issues surrounding women's health and the health of communities, including boys and men, you have to address the issue of capacity. You have now trained, your hospital has trained more than 1,000 nurse midwives. And that in turn helps all of their communities as well. First, explain to us what we're looking at here. You were telling me a little backstage, and how has your focus on midwifery in particular kind of been a portal of entry to this?
Well, I want you to understand that this is a country where education for girls was not accepted. And to go to school in itself was a bad thing. So if you don't go to school, you cannot aim for a profession, you cannot train, you cannot acquire skills. And to be able to today have medical schools where 70% of the students are female, a country where we have been able to train 1,000 midwives to send out throughout the country in itself is remarkable. And when I go into my operating theatre and I see a senior female, a female surgeon assisted by another female surgeon, a female anaesthetist, a female instrument nurse, a female supervisor in a hospital built by a female, and everybody combining their skills to save a little boy's life. Amazing. That's what education brings. And that's what I want for every country in the world. And if we've been able to train 1,000 midwives in Somaliland, I need 1 million midwives in Somaliland. This week, it's Black Maternity Week. And we can only address maternal mortality if we train more midwives and make midwifery accessible to the underserved communities, wherever they are. And this makes it all worthwhile.
Yeah.
And when I think of the site where this operation is taking place is where people used to execute people. And I live on it. Forget about former First Lady. That's been my address for the past 20 years. And it's the best thing I've ever done in my life. I feel blessed.
And Edna, you have a memoir coming out later this year that I encourage people to look for. Shalini, this is the last question. We could speak about this all afternoon. You are very, very big on talking about a people-centered approach. You started with a virus-centered approach in your work against Ebola. People-centered approach. Just explain to us in the last 2 minutes what that means.
Sure. This is going to sound like the most obvious thing to say, but we forget it all the time. Viruses don't spread diseases, people spread diseases. And that is
one of the simplest things we forget. When we think about epidemics and so on, we're so focused on the disease and how to solve the disease, we don't think about the people that it's affecting. And when we think about the people that it's affecting, we'll pause to listen and understand why they are behaving the way they are behaving, who they will believe. In Malawi, for instance, maternal newborn health was really helped in one village when a grandmother network started giving the messages versus the doctors, right? So it's about really understanding people and their decision making. And that means that we need to, in all of the work that we do, learn to listen and not assume based on observations. When we look at a woman making a bad business decision, unless we actually get underneath why she's making the decision she's making, we don't know whether it's bad or not. We need to create spaces for women to network with other women. We've seen this in multiple forums, including with women entrepreneurs, where when a woman knows another woman, data shows that she's much more likely to succeed in her business and much more likely to sustain that business. Just knowing another woman in business, right? And then finally, we need to be willing to open up to get new voices and perspectives into the mix. The health debate is not just for public health specialists and doctors, it's for filmmakers and all anthropologists and private sector and everybody else.
I think you all are perfect examples of the saying that sometimes the messenger is really as important as the message. So I want to thank you all for the work you've done and for this incredible conversation. Thank you.
Just like any other girl living in Jordan, we face verbal harassment and sometimes it gets physical. I was walking on the streets and one guy he stalked me and he attacked me.
Be confident. If you think like an attacker, then you know how to react. Do not show fear. Focus on your breath. Coming from a background in martial arts, I believed that women can stand up for themselves.
كثير زادت ثقتي بنفسي وبساعدها بكل مجالات حياتي.
هذا كثير كويس أنا عجبني.
Lena Khalifa, a fighter from Amman who's giving women the strength to defend themselves.
And we want to empower leaders of social change, like Lena Khalifa.
Wow, well, thank God she uses her powers for good. Hi, everyone. I'm Elise Nelson. I'm president and CEO of Vital Voices Global Partnership. I'm so thrilled to be here, particularly with my very good friend and Vital Voices honoree, She Fighter founder, Lena Khalifa.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me here. I'm so excited to be here.
She Fighter is a lot more than a business. It's more than an organization. It really is a movement. And I think what I find so often with women leaders that we work with around the world is that women step up to lead in a very different way. They're motivated often by a personal situation where they decide there's a wrong, I experienced it, I saw it, I want to step up and right it. Can you talk about your motivation?
Definitely. So when I was young, a kid, basically, I was bullied because I look different. The boys kept telling me in the street to go back home because I belong inside and play with dolls. But of course, I did not want to play with dolls. So I beat them up most of the times. That's why they call me troublemaker. And they always call women troublemaker, but they call men persistence. Because you're trying to, fight something that they don't want to change about you. So my parents decided it's enough fighting. I have a scar here. And they said, we need to enroll Lena in a taekwondo school.
And you were what, 5?
I was 5 when I started.
Wow.
And it's the best decision they ever made because I was taught discipline, commitment, responsibility from a young age. And at least I can beat up the boys, but with supervision.
So, but at what point did you realize, okay, this is more powerful than just beating people up or physical, physical sports? It's more powerful than that.
Yeah.
It can empower.
So when I started growing up, I stick to Taekwondo. I got my black belt 3 dan. I won 20 gold medals, 3 of them international. I learned Kung Fu, boxing, kickboxing. You can hire me as a bodyguard. Don't hire me as a bodyguard. But when I was in college, my friend got attacked and abused by her brother and father. And she came to university one time with bruises on her face. And I got really angry. I told her, why didn't you stand up to yourself? Why didn't you at least push him back or do something? And she said, women are weak. She said, we cannot do anything. Let's just face it. We cannot do anything. And I said, we can do something. I mean, martial arts self-defense have taught me to just stand strong, to have a voice, to be confident, and not accept injustice whatsoever. So I said, what can I do? And I have no money. I said, I'll start teaching women self-defense at the basement of my parents' house. And that's how I started.
It's amazing that was only 7 years ago.
Yes.
It's astounding how far you've come, and it's really swept all over the world.
Yeah, it is.
Expanding globally. What's interesting to me is what you were up against. So in Jordan, as little as a year ago, if a woman was raped by a man, as long as the attacker agreed to marry her, he would not go to prison.
Yeah. So there's a law that it says exactly if a rapist if a man raped a woman and married her, all the charges will be stayed.
So violence against women, I mean, I certainly find, in Jordan, in this country, around the world, it is one of the greatest problems that seems to be getting worse.
Yeah.
And although we have greater laws and stronger advocates, still, it's a problem. And I think a lot of this is because of the need for a cultural change, behavioral change. And I feel like when I look at what you're doing with She Fighter, it's so out of the box. I mean, you don't even know there's a box. Actually, you kicked through it years ago.
I kicked the box. I just punched the box.
But I mean, how do you go about creating cultural change in a place like Jordan, quite frankly, anywhere?
Yeah. So technically, you need to create a system. You cannot. I've been seeing a lot of activists and movements, but you need to really create a product or a service that actually can make effect on the long run. So what I did, I created a service. I created She Fighter, and She Fighter is a program for women, and it helps women how to defend themselves and mentally and psychologically and physically. But you need to create a system. You need to test the system and then sell the system. So men at the beginning, they used to threaten me, sue cases where they just sue me in court, and they just keep calling me, and it was just annoying having threats from men all the time. But when it is because, anyway, I'm not going to go through details, But after proving that She Fighter is a very successful program for women and girls, men started calling me fathers, and they're like, can you convince my daughter to join She Fighter? I want her to join. Can you call her? It will be different if you call her. Men stop me in the street. I mean, this is in a very male-dominated society, and they tell me, you are my role model. I want to be like you. If you're running for a president, I'll vote for you. And I told him, well, we have a kingdom. I mean, you cannot really. But it actually makes me happy because men respect also results and power and position. And if you prove yourself that you are actually, your service and product is actually making a change, then they want to join you. They want to partner with you. Like my business partner in Holland is a man. So, yeah, technically, you just need to do what you have to do.
Engaging men has been critical in making that change. You know, they say that, and studies have shown that attackers have a type. They are really targeting women who are not comfortable in their own skin.
Yep.
How do you, when you meet women and begin to work with them, how do you get them to be comfortable in their own skin? How do you make that transformation happen?
Oh, so technically, when you start the training, you have a lot of doubts. But as you go with the training, when you do it physically, your mind will start accepting what's going on. Then your mind will start believing that you can do it. You can defend yourself. So you will reach to a phase that you will never create attackers will never attack you. You know why? Because you create this energy and this belief inside of you that you are ready no matter what. So you will not create what you're afraid of. I mean, if you're afraid of getting raped or being assaulted, it's going to happen because you're afraid of it. You're creating it here. But when you have the training deep inside and your body becomes stronger, your mind is stronger, your walk is going to be different, your tone is going to be different, your voice, you become so confident.
Let me ask you something, as we're running out of time, and I think these people want to get involved in She Fighters. So how can they get involved?
So I have a news to announce. We are doing, we're bringing She Fighter to the United States with collaboration, of course, with Vital Voices. And we're doing the She Fighter Global Tour in different cities in the 16 days of activism against gender-based violence in November. So you need to follow up on that.
But if everybody here wants a little taste of what's to come with this global tour.
Okay, so let's stand up. I'll ask you all to stand up. You've been sitting here for a long time, right? It's just, you need to move and digest all the food you had. Okay. So up there, maybe you don't want to stand up because
Lena, you have 4 seconds left.
Yeah. Okay, so you're going to repeat after me. I'm going to do the she shout. We're going to shout together, okay? I really want you to shout really loud. Okay, so hands up. Don't hit each other.
I have 4-inch heels. If I can do it, you can.
Let's do it. Sheepal!
Sheepal.
Okay, my grandma can shout louder. Can you shout really loud? Let's do it again. Sheepal!
Sheepalm.
She elbow.
She elbow.
She angry.
She angry.
She kick.
She kick.
She fighter.
She fighter.
Woo! Good job. Thank you all.
I'll be like watching TV while playing a computer game, and then I'll have like an iPad next to me for another show.
Yeah, Mom, it's really hard math thing.
Ladies, thank you. Thank you all for being here. My name is Stephanie Rule. I'm an anchor with MSNBC. We are here to talk tech, but before we do, since I have the mic, I'm going to steal it. I want to just take one moment to honor these days that we're here and Tina Brown for a second. I don't know if anyone else has. This is a time when the conversation we're about to have is going to dig into the scary environment we're living in because of technology. People who've spoken last night, today, tomorrow are talking about all sorts of challenges we face around the world. And at Women in the World, Tina Brown has been taking this on in the most extraordinary fashion over the last 10 years. What an achievement. Congratulations. Thank you, Tina. Woo! So let's get started. I am lucky enough to be here because I work in television, but the reason I'm thrilled to be on this panel is because this topic means so much to me. Technology, screen time, and kids is something that parents across the world have said is their number one concern. I myself have a 5-year-old, a 10-year-old, and a 12-year-old. This keeps me up at night. It occupies my days, and I know I'm not alone. So the panel that you have before you, I'm thrilled to announce, are also moms. So it's not like we're specifically talking, when you talk to social media companies, when you interview them, it really feels like they're disconnected. And when you talk about the issues that you're worried about and the crises, they keep talking about community. And you're going, community? I get it. It's amazing that we've created this technology, but it could be so damaging and so large, we don't even realize the ramifications. So maybe we're just in chapter 1. So I'd like really to go down the line, each panelist to introduce themselves and actually tell us a little bit about motherhood and how this impacts your life or how you think about technology and screen time.
I'm Marissa Shorenstein, president of the Northern Region for AT&T, and this is an issue that is dear to me both as a mother of children who are 7 and 5, and so I'm just beginning the journey of technology in their lives, but also in my day-to-day life and how a technology company, a company that is responsible for selling devices and the connectivity that goes with it, how we can ensure that we're doing our part in this conversation. And so in my home, we're pretty strict. Our kids do not have access to devices at all, except for when they're on a plane, train, or automobile. So they like to travel. And they get to watch a lot of movies when we travel. There is no internet connectivity on the device itself, just the movies that we've downloaded. And so that is all they have access to. But I will say that it's amazing when they have had an iPhone or something in their hand, they intuitively know how to use it. And so even though they don't have regular access to it, I know that they know what they're doing.
Your kids don't have devices, though 84% of kids between the ages of 3 and 7 do. It's like another appendage. It's a prized possession. Mimi, how about you?
So I'm Mimi To. I'm a cultural anthropologist, and I specialize in teenage culture around digital technologies. So I try to decode the teenage tech world for grown-ups. I've raised my own 2 kids almost through teenagehood. We're empty nesters as of this fall. I'm totally heartbroken that my kids have left home. I'm proud to say that both my daughter and my son are majoring in computer science, and as a family, we've completely embraced technology, and it's not that we haven't had our struggles and differences from time to time, but I feel like I can safely say, at least for my kids, that technology has been an overwhelmingly positive influence in their lives.
My name is Delaney Rustin. I'm a physician and documentary filmmaker, and I have actually put my very personal struggles around screen time into a documentary, in part because I learned, trying to get other people to share their stories, how personal parenting is. I had been doing documentaries in mental health, and when I would go to parents and say, oh, okay, this is going to be easy compared to getting people to talk about, really intense mental health issues, people were like, oh no, I don't want to share my stories. So I'm so fortunate that many people did in the film, and that I was able to show my struggles but come up with solutions.
Well, part of it is we're embarrassed, we're ashamed. We're ashamed that it makes us look like bad parents when we actually say how much screen time our kids get, but they're also spending so much time on screens because there's a lot of great reasons to use them. We're using them constantly. I want to share some numbers. AT&T actually commissioned a series of surveys here in New York about how teens, because I don't want to be super dour, I really want to find solutions for us, how they use their phones. And I found these results surprising. 2/3 of teens that were surveyed say they have engaged in at least one risky behavior online. 57% of teens say they know how to hide content from their parents. That's 100% in my house. Half of teens say they have experienced some form of cyberbullying. For you, Marissa, AT&T did this study. What stuck out the most?
I think what stuck out the most is that when we went back into the research again, we added millennial parents, and so we had a spectrum of ages. So we looked at ages 3 through teenage years, and what we found, what you said before, is that as young as 3, kids are engaging in devices at a really high rate. But for teenagers, what we already knew, but what was confirmed for us in the polls, is that teens know better how to use these devices than their parents do. They're digital natives, and we're not. And so what is amazing is that the disconnect between what parents think they know their kids are doing and what their kids are actually doing. What the survey showed is that kids, like 57% of kids are hiding or know how to hide from their parents what they're doing online. And when you think about it, really, this is just another form. I mean, I was a teenager once, as were you. I engaged in a lot of risky behavior. It just wasn't online. But now it is. And so now, as parents that didn't grow up in this digital age, we need to figure out how to address a different part of the issue.
Delaney, let's address those exact numbers, though. So as a mother of a 12-year-old, if I saw these numbers and I said, okay, if my child has engaged in at least one risky behavior, if they're hiding content from me, and if they've experienced cyberbullying, my immediate response is, okay, then, I want to monitor every single thing they write, they read, they send. That sounds rational. And if something comes up and there's another mother in the group who doesn't, we're immediately judging her. Well, I guess she's not really on top of things. But these are teenagers. These are formative years. It's their years when they're exerting free will. If our mothers were listening in on every phone call we had when we were 13 years old, that would be an awful invasion of privacy. And that's how teens communicate right now. So where's the balance?
Well, you know, one of the most powerful stories in Screenagers was a young girl, Hannah, who she sent a picture because a boy was begging her to do so. And what she told me was it wasn't that was so hard, even though it went through school, and it was. What was so painful for her is that she didn't feel like she could tell her mother about what happened because she was so worried she was going to lose her social media.
What kind of picture?
It was a picture of her in a bra.
That's an important fact.
Sorry. And she was so worried that her mother would take away all of her social media. And she was also so worried that her mother would judge her so negatively. So it was the ultimate fear of rejection from peers and disconnection from her mother. And what I started to think about is that's not what we want, right? When we use these scare tactics, it's really often that our kids aren't going to come to us. And what we really want is to have ways that they will come to us before doing risky behaviors, or if they do them, that they don't feel like we're going to make them feel worse. So because of that, I started with my family having weekly short conversations to talk about these issues in a non-heated way. So it's called Tech Talk Tuesday, and we always start with something positive about screen time, because I've learned if you don't validate how actually positive most of what they're doing is, that they're not going to listen, they're not going to buy in. And then we talk about an issue, such as any of these there's thousands of issues, and it's been 3 years that I post these on the Screenagers movie website, and it's so exciting that a lot of just thousands of parents around the world are using these to have these calm conversations so that we can not be using the scare tactic. I call it the share tactic.
Nice. Mimi, isn't the scare tactic somewhat disingenuous if we're saying to our kids, Facebook is filled with trolls, as is Twitter and Instagram, it's dangerous, it's foul, you don't know what could be there. And as we're telling our kids that, we're checking our own profiles all day, every day. Right. So how do you make the argument we need to chill a little bit? Yeah.
We need to celebrate all that technology is. And by doing so, is that sort of the drink with your kids approach before they go to college so they won't party their heads? I can't figure it out.
That doesn't
Not
work.
that I condone that.
Yeah, no, I think what's really interesting and challenging about parenting today is that our kids are growing up with experiences that we didn't necessarily share growing up. So I think the question of a generational divide is particularly acute. So you can say, oh, kids always did risky things, or they had interests that weren't aligned with what the parent had, but there's what we found in our research, like I have like dozens of teen whisperers fanning around the internet, trying to understand the value that kids are getting. And when you talk to young people, they will say that the internet is a lifeline to social connection, to information, to knowledge. And yes, there are risky things happening, but it's a human rights issue for them, like to have a phone taken away or the internet disconnected. And just because, they might meet an unsavory person in the park, we don't ban them from these spaces. So the kind of, one of the things I direct the Connected Learning Lab at the University of California, and we have 35 faculty who are studying, various dimensions of kids' digital engagement. And, one of our faculty, Candace Odgers, did a review of the common beliefs about kids and technology and found that the research is really clear that there are just as many positives as negatives. And in fact, there are lots of studies about the positive benefits of how kids find social support online, find information, learn new things. But the media uptake is overwhelmingly skewed towards the negative. And the solutions that get talked about, because it's fear-based, is control, regulation, banning. That's one thing to recognize the risks, but the path from there to solutions isn't always straightforward. But as parents, we get worried. It's natural. We get worried. We get concerned. We don't want our kids to encounter negative parts of the internet. But I think there has to be a balanced approach to mitigating risk, but also really understanding the tremendous value that these experiences have for kids.
What are some, Marissa, of the most valuable control tools? I'm not alone in, we have this idea, I'm cooking dinner, I'm going to hand my 5-year-old an iPad for an hour, and you blink, and they've been on it for 6 hours. And it sounds crazy, except it's happened to pretty much all of us.
Absolutely. So the question is, when you give that kid a device, is it your device or is it their device?
Okay.
Because if it's your device, then they have access to all the things that you have access to. If it's their device, and it doesn't matter what age they are, if you want to start them young, I think that's great. But put those parental controls on that device to give you a peace of mind about what they can and cannot see. And so what we've done at AT&T is we launched a program called Screen Ready, where at all of our stores across New York City metro area, 130 stores, you can go into a store, if you're an AT&T customer or not, it doesn't matter. You go in and you ask, how do I set up my parental controls? Because the truth is, even though you can figure it out on your own, I have no idea, and you might not have any idea. So we said, let's make sure that all of our retail sales associates know how to do this. And you can go in and they can just help you and tell you, if you want to control it by age group, here's how to do that. If you want to have an alert every time your child tries to download something, you can do that. And you can change it based on their age. And I think that gives parents a real peace of mind so that, as Mimi says, they can explore and they can use these devices. And you don't have to feel like you're constantly in a struggle and a battle with them.
Mimi, is no technology not the answer because it's simply a part of our daily life as well as our social fabric? My son, as I said, is in the 7th grade. Mm-hmm. And until just a few months ago, he didn't have a phone at all. Mm-hmm. And I found that there's a huge negative impact because it's the only way kids communicate. Mm-hmm. And if you don't have that medium to communicate, you're the odd man out. Mm-hmm. My son, at the end of school, lied to his classmates and gave them my husband's phone number because he didn't want to say he didn't have a phone, which resulted in my husband during the workday getting FaceTime from Brianna.
And that was really awkward for him when someone came into a conference room and said, Brianna FaceTiming you? And so since then, we have gotten him a phone, but we kind of out of embarrassment for my husband. But is that no technology not the answer? Because if you don't have it, no one can reach you.
Yeah, and this obviously it depends on the age of the child, but I think once the kids are getting into that age where their relationship to their peers is very important, and especially with boys, the gaming environments, research, has often focused on things like addictive behaviors, which actually afflict only a very small percentage of young people. So if you have a kid who has problems self-regulating, whether it's social media or gaming, absolutely, if they fall within that clinical bucket, but over 90% of kids don't have a problematic
Are we
relationship.
overstating that? We're taking this, oh my goodness, kids addicted to video games. Wow, we're saying it while we're watching endless hours of Real Housewives.
Well, the issue is that we all have to learn to regulate our media consumption, and kids have to do it at an even younger age. So they have to learn those skills of self-regulation, choice, and wise media choices at some point in their life, and they have to be supported in developing those skills. The longer you delay kids being able to exercise those muscles, the longer you delay their ability to self-regulate. So you have to judge, just like with food and other things that you can overindulge in, what the right guardrail supports for that is. But just to give a data point on the other side of things, research is also really clear that if for boys, for example, they don't participate at all in gaming culture, that's actually an indicator of social isolation, because what boys, video gaming is the kind of water cooler where boys socialize in this culture right now. And so to say like, oh, I'm afraid my son is going to be addicted to video games, so I'll ban it, there are all these side effects. On the girls' side, girls have been lead adopters and innovators in social media. There could be problematic peer relations, cyberbullying, and so on that happens. But we also know that for when girls have a troubling experience, when they feel bad about something, that their ability to reach out to friends or to a parent through social media is incredibly protective and helps them bounce back. So an unintended side effect of saying, oh, my girl is emotionally vulnerable, I'm going to ban her from social media, is you're also banning her from a social support structure that helps her emotional resilience. And so it's, you have to really make sure that you're not creating both a source of tension between parents and kids, where parents feel out of touch with what kids value. This becomes a wedge issue, a point of tension, which valuing your children's interests in a situation like you described is a really great way to mediate that. But you also have to make sure you're not cutting them off from really important sources of social support.
Delaney, you gifted us when you went through this struggle with your daughter. You made a film as you went the back and forth of whether to get her a device, and I want to share just a bit of it.
Can I say one thing about it just to set that up is I was having a lot of stress in my house, and I'm sure many of you are at this very moment. And so Mimi and I kind of disagree with what you said, because for me, it's like I could have tons of desserts at dinner, and then it's 11 at night, and there's a warm chocolate chip cookie. I don't care how full I am going to have that warm chocolate chip cookie. And I think that if we don't have boundaries with our kids and say that they just need to self-regulate when we see the science that the teen and right before the teen years, the dopamine center of the brain is most active. You can actually see that the chemical of dopamine, the pleasure chemical, is the highest concentration, and the receptors are the highest number, that we sometimes are setting them up for failure. So I think we agree to some extent. My daughter, was begging for an iPhone so she could do anything, anywhere. And at the time I was starting this film, she only had an iPod. So that meant she could only do certain things and certain places. I was very happy with that. So we can see the clip.
Well, let's take a look.
My feeling is you're just going to get in the group and everyone looks at their device, and I think that there's a lot of value in interacting
directly with your friends.
25.
Okay, how would you convince me to get a smartphone?
To convince you?
Yeah, how would you convince me?
All my friends have it. Makes me feel a lot more connected and
to who or what?
To the world, to my friends. And I'm not gonna be
That's pretty funny. Well, she has the phone. How's it working out?
Oh boy, it's been a long journey. But one of the things I really do believe that having some sacred screen-free times is really important. And for us, I really wanted it to be around sleep and study time and some family time. But I couldn't get her to engage, really. So I finally just gave her a 4-page contract. That did not go well. And I was like, gosh, why won't you help me to do this? And I finally realized that I was talking so negatively about screen time. Like, oh, those snap things, they don't disappear. You think they do, but they don't. And there was no way in her brain to think that she could collaborate with me. She saw me as the enemy. And I started to really change, and I started to validate, how important this was to her. And we were able to come up with rules that have really worked. And for example, she really wanted to use her phone to get dressed in the morning, to communicate with her friends. And I thought, that was like smoking your first cigarette in the morning, right? That's going to lead to definite overuse. So I was really pushing back on that. But I finally said, okay, we agreed on that. And then she worked much better with us in the evening for a very reasonable time to get off screens.
To smoke.
So, and to limit it in the evening. So that's an example of working with our teens through being positive and using, again, the Tech Talk Tuesday. We negotiate and we kind of check in now and then about what our few rules are that we do have, which has been so important.
Then set your rules in a positive way. I know we're out of time, but I do want to leave with some more constructive advice. Mimi, if there was one action step, just one thing parents could do, what would it be?
So I guess it would be to take a pause, suspend judgment, don't pathologize the tech use, and really take some time to understand what's driving the interest and try to connect with the positives. And that can be amplifying something good you see in gaming, or in girls' case, recognize that they're learning incredible tech skills and parlay it into a sense of empowerment around technology. Invite kids over to do some digital interest that's related to things they're genuinely interested. And if you see a problematic behavior, don't try to shut it down. Try to connect it with something positive. There are lots of online programs where you can find tech mentorship, tips for doing shared digital projects. We run a nonprofit called Connected Camps, where we train teenage nerds and girl tech heroes to work with younger kids. So there's lots of resources, even if you don't have the tech expertise yourself, to mine kids' digital interests and make them a positive force in their lives.
For me, it was accepting that maybe kids just socialize and connect in a different way. When I would look at my son home every Friday night not wanting to have friends over, I thought he was antisocial. It wasn't what I did, when in fact they're playing video games with kids at other houses. I thought that wasn't normal. It is the new normal. Mm-hmm. And maybe it's something we have to embrace, because they're not out in the street. We know that drunk driving is down for teens. We know that adolescent sex is down. We know that adolescent drinking is down. So maybe there's a way to embrace this is their new socializing. What would your tip be?
Well, there's two. There's the parental controls, as we discussed, and also it's just about communication. Talking to your kids about this as if you would talk to them about any other issue that a parent would talk to their child about, whether it's teenage sex or anything else.
Oh, we want to talk about that.
The next panel.
Yeah, I'm going to go no to that, yeah.
But it's just about communication, and it's about using the tools that already exist that you may not know about. Just go out and ask questions, and there is a lot of help out there.
Well, I so appreciate you all communicating with us on this massively important topic, and thank you for your time.
So much fury about the jokes Michelle Wolf made on stage last night.
After an instant online backlash.
New tonight, Kevin Hart is apologizing.
I'm even in trouble with my mother, so don't worry, everyone hates me.
This has been a lot of problems.
Isn't it funny that the only time your race or gender is questioned is when you're not a white man?
You can do jokes about anything if the jokes are funny.
If you're Hispanic and a person at a podium asks, are there any Hispanics in the room? That's your cue to get out of that room.
I happen to be also a member of the LGBTQ or STUVWXYZ community.
Who's had rape jokes forever? But it's just like those jokes have usually been like, rape! That's the full joke.
There's some things that I had to do as gay that I didn't have to do as black. I didn't have to come out black.
Raise your hand if someone stared at your boobs on the way to work today.
Mom, I'm black. Oh, no, Lord Jesus. Oh, that's black, Lord. Anything but black Jesus.
As you can see, I'm being joined by 4 shy, very retiring, withdrawn people. I'm going to try to draw them out as best as I can. They don't have an opinion either. I'll just say that in advance that we're all grateful that you helped make light during very dark times. So let me introduce you formally to Judy Gold, who's at the end, comedian, writer, podcast host, Kill Me Now, which is the apt title. Wanda Sykes, comedian, writer, actress, producer. Just put out a tweet saying that new Netflix special, Not Normal, coming out. Jenny Hagel, writer, producer, hysterical person for Late Night with Seth Meyers. Cameron Esposito, comedian and co-creator of Take My Wife. So, you know, comedians are wicked smart. That's what makes them funny. They are, in many ways, social commentary. So let's dig into what you're digging into. Wanda, let's start with you. You've been touring with a new stand-up special. It's called Oh Well. Did I do that right?
Yes.
Oh well.
Oh well.
Do you think the political climate affects your comedy, and does it help to be funny when you're really mad?
Absolutely. The political climate affects my comedy. I draw from that. You know, to me, it's like the elephant in the room if I don't talk about what's happening in the world and in politics. And I'm really funny when things are effed up in the country.
Yep.
There's just more to draw off of because I am angry. You know, and that was from I'm Gonna Be Me. And I think that was right. Bush was out on his way out, and Obama was coming in. So I was feeling pretty good.
What's making you mad now? What's
this
your comedy fodder right now?
It's a lot of F words.
Yeah.
And this new one, I'm on fire in this new one.
Yeah,
it's really good.
Jenny, you're a writer and performer for Late Night with Seth Meyers. Your job is to take this smorgasbord of bad news and turn it into a buffet, a sort of all-you-can-eat buffet. But you're also a triple threat: LGBTQ, Hispanic, a woman. How do you turn that
not to brag
humor? Yeah, not to brag.
That's pretty great.
How do you set aside sort of feelings of are you under attack? How do you turn that into funny? How do you turn it into funny?
I think there is such a barrage every day. I think during this administration, I just have never felt so like every morning you wake up and it feels like when a cartoon where there's like a lot of bees coming at the cartoon character's face, and they're like, I think that's what it feels like every morning when I get up and look at Twitter and look at the news. And I think the only way that I can try to make sense of it, because there's so much, is just to try to focus on the things where I have a really strong gut reaction to the story. And if there's a headline where I feel like I have a really strong personal reaction, a really strong point of view on it, then that's where I feel like I try to focus on writing from.
Can you give us an example of a headline that led to a joke?
Sure. Yeah, I think there was a clip about there was the weekend that Michelle Wolf did the correspondence dinner. Everybody was very mad on Monday morning that she had said something about eyeshadow. And everybody was talking about that a lot.
The smoky eyeshadow,
yes.
I remember.
And that was what I felt like every headline was and every article, except also that weekend Trump gave a rally, and at one point in the middle of the rally, he goes, "Are there any Hispanics in the room?" "No?" "Good." And I was like, "Excuse me?" And so I felt like, for me, I was reading the news Sunday night, and I thought, like, I can't believe this isn't getting more airtime. This is important. This is scary to me personally, and it's scary to me that no one noticed this. So then I wrote something about it because I felt like, hey, we got to focus up.
Yeah. So. Judy, you have a book coming out saying, yes.
Yes, I can say that.
Yes, I can say that.
Yep.
We're looking forward to that. But you do stand up all over the country, and your podcast is Kill Me Now.
Right.
Which is what's pissing you off. What's pissing you off now?
Oh, my God. We don't have enough time. Seriously. But I just, Jenny was saying, like, I wake up every day now, literally, and I have an inner dialogue of, don't look at your phone. Don't look your, and then, right. The other part, no, something happened, someone got arrested, I have to look. No, don't look at, it's just, we are in the weirdest time for comedy. The fact that comics who are truth tellers are being booed and hissed, I get so much hate mail. We've made fun of every president.
Give me a sense
and
of
now,
why are they coming at you? What are they saying?
Trump has no sense of humor. Zero, because you have to have self-awareness. You have to be, it's true.
Right.
And it's disarming. Humor is disarming. And he always has armor up. So, and his supporters have no sense of humor. It's as if you do a Trump joke, his supporters will not laugh at anything for the rest of your entire set, even if they think it's funny. He has poisoned. I mean, look at him. He wants to cancel Saturday Night Live. What is wrong with you? To be mocked on Saturday Night Live? Like, I wish they would mock me on Saturday Night Live,
Hilarious. Cameron, we saw a bit from your new special, Rape Jokes, which I would recommend highly. I mean, all of your work. I've never enjoyed prepping for a panel more than watching all of your material. But Rape Jokes has been heralded as the great first comedy after Me Too. In it, you talk about your own sexual assaults. Why talk about that now? Why is that important now? This is a very lighthearted question. Yeah. Easy one for you.
First of all, I'm actually super comfortable talking about this because I think honesty is really the way to go. This has been such a relief. We talk so much about the piece of shit who lives in the White House, which is really how I'm going to refer to him on the rest of this panel. I'm so angry about so many things that he's done. One thing that has happened in part because he casually occupies that space sometimes is because one thing that's happened as a side effect is that I was so angry when he got elected. We knew who he was. This isn't a situation where it was like coming out later. We knew exactly who he was. He became the president of the United States. Okay, well then in that case, I'm not going to be quiet anymore about the things that have happened to me. And I think that's, what's been happening across the country. And Rape Jokes was, I'm super proud of it. I toured it in really small rooms and released it on my own. It's just for free on my website, and have raised $95,000 for rape crisis intervention.
That's awesome.
For RAIN?
Yes, absolutely.
That's great.
So I say that because so often right now it can feel like, is anything even going our way? Is anybody on our side? And you can watch this special for free, and then there's an option to donate, and people have donated $95,000. That's just a small little thing to point out to you. Like, it's not over. The fight isn't over. It's ongoing, and there are a lot more of us.
What struck me about when you talk about your own sexual assault is that for years you didn't even see it in that way. That there was the light bulb moment, and I think that happened for a lot of people in the Me Too movement.
Yeah, I mean, I was raised like really, really Catholic. I had no sex ed. I was the mascot of my high school, and my boyfriend was the captain of the high school football team. It was the classic story that you've heard a million times, where he would score a touchdown. I was a red bird. I know sex ed, which most of us don't. I didn't know that I could have like sexual urges. I didn't know what lesbians were. I didn't know gay people were real. I mean, this is all I'm from the 90s is when I'm talking about growing up. This is now. So yeah, when it came time to be in college and be experimenting with dating, I was put into a situation where I didn't identify what happened to me as assault until literally like 10 years later, because I just thought, well, none of us like having sex, and all of us are drinking to survive. And so I think this is it's actually like it's a relief. It feels like a relief to talk about it.
It's a really powerful moment. Wanda, I want to get to you. Yeah, people who are familiar with it. Yeah.
Thank you, the balcony.
You got a lot of fans, all of you. Wanda, last September, you did a show in Red Bank, New Jersey, and you made a joke about the president. And the heckler said you were being too political, that you should never bash the president. Has the tone changed post-election? How do you deal with being heckled like that?
Well, honestly, it seems like it's okay for straight white guys to bash the president.
Yep.
But any black woman or a person of color, you better shut the hell up. You're going to catch hell, and that's what it seems like. And in Red Bank, it was ridiculous because they were saying, it was only maybe like 20 people, and of course they were.
Oh, they said like hundreds.
It wasn't.
I know.
Hundreds. It wasn't hundreds.
I know.
Because you're ridiculous to even come to my show if you're a Trump
right.
fan.
They know who you are.
Yeah. What the hell is your problem? What do you
That's
think?
that's my
What do you
question.
think? Why are you here? What are you doing? Yeah.
What is
I know.
What happened?
They know Wanda, and they go to the show and get pissed off.
Obviously. Yeah.
She's probably pro-Trump. When I think about people that love Trump, it's like Wanda Sykes.
And Wanda,
I'm your girl. I'm your girl. Yeah. It was like me or Sarah Sanders. Who's going to do that?
Please.
Let's see. Sarah sold out.
I was busy.
Judy, you talk about how the culture has changed. You've provocatively said, I'm not going to perform at college campuses anymore.
But hello? Yeah, I mean, all right. I just have to say, if you count how many comics have had to apologize in the past 2 years for old tweets or for things that they have said on stage, and yet that orange piece of crap has never apologized. He lies every single day. I don't understand why we are held to a higher standard than the President of the United States. It is, and we're telling jokes. We are telling jokes. We're telling jokes. We're not making laws. We're not affecting people's lives and liberties and separating parents from. We're not doing that. We're telling a joke. If you don't like it, turn off the channel, leave, go do something else. Okay? Knit. Learn how to crochet. I can't. So, but college campuses, which was the bastion of freedom, of free speech, they now have young millennial bookers, or what's the new one? Millennial, Gen Y.
Lost all hope.
Gen Z.
Yeah. These people are telling comedians what they can and cannot say before they go on stage. Now, here's what a basic problem is. There's no intent. They never take the time to, what is the intent of this joke? What is this person trying to say? Instead, it's about Carlin's 7 words. But now there's not 7 anymore. There's 700 words you can't say. And now people are getting offended by proxy, for someone, oh, that sounds offensive. I should really be offended by that. It's the climate is ridiculous. It's unbelievable. They have poisoned. They poison it when they go in the clubs.
And yet, so in some ways you're saying PC culture goes too far at times, and yet you have a line in your thing about PC culture is just being nice, or...
Yeah, I don't think that...
I think there's a little bit of a distinction to make here, because I think that when we're talking about the president, that is purposefully ignorant. He's being presented every day with information on how he could do better, and he is choosing again and again to harm people. And I think that you know, when we talk about like my responsibility, the responsibility that I'm actually like into as a comic is to pay attention and use evolving language and get better all the time. And I think sometimes we lump like kindness, respect in PC culture is this great word that people in our industry, especially straight white cisgender men, use to be able to say whatever the hell they want. And like, I'm on a bill with you. I actually don't want to follow you if you're gonna like use the gay F word that I don't even use, because I don't use words that don't apply to me that are also the last thing somebody else hears when they are beaten to death. I'm a stand-up comic. So I'm kind of goofy. No, I feel like stand-up comics are like the most serious people in the world. I'm a really serious person. I take my responsibility to young people and to especially people in the LGBT community so seriously. So like straight up, there's a joke that I have about periods that I used to say women, and somebody asked me, can you use the phrase people with periods because there are trans dudes who have periods? That is like no skin off my back. To
See,
like
that's
evolve.
something I would make a joke about. That's
Like-
someone
Yeah. But I just feel
said
like
to
that.
me, can
but
you
that-
say people with periods? Like I would then write a bit about
But
people
I
with
just feel
periods.
like that's
You know?
somebody whose life is already so hard. Why do I, somebody
Right.
who's marginalized, need to make somebody whose life is more marginalized
Right,
worse?
but also
I am trying to lift.
It's
like,
not.
the
It's not making their life harder.
I would really disagree.
Oh, okay. Well, I feel like when you use, I don't use that F word either. But when, you know, I talk about being gay, I talk about being a gay parent, I talk about, you know, everything in my act. And when I talk about trans people, or if I talk about they, them, you know, everyone is fodder. You know, it's not, it's as if I'm bringing them, I'm talking about them. I'm not putting them down. I'm putting them in my act.
Does it make it harder to be a comedian, though, in a divided America? Like the panel's title, that divided America can't take a joke. Is that real for you when you're out in the world? Well, Jenny, I also want to ask you, because I think what you do on Seth Meyers, which is jokes Seth can't tell. The idea that he's a straight white man, he can't tell certain jokes, it's too taboo. But when they come from you, it's funny. Can you explain that in the context of what we're talking about?
Sure. I think there's a phrase that a lot of people use in comedy, which is punching up. And I think you, part of what comedians do, and Judy mentioned this before, is that you want to speak truth to power, and that making fun of someone who has a higher status than you is a very different act than making fun of someone who is below you, right? And so I think when people make jokes about the president, part of I think why we all feel like it's fine to do that is because he has a lot of power. And so we're not taking anything away from him really by doing that. And so I think that the same way, like if, you know, Seth is a straight white guy, and if he wants to make jokes at lesbians' expense, it kind of feels like a bummer because he's punching down. That's a group of people that has less social power than he does.
Right.
I identify as lesbian. If I make a joke about lesbians, it's in a different kind of fun.
Can
Again,
you tell the penguin joke?
Which
the penguin in tuxedos joke?
I don't know if I remember it.
You probably just said the punchline.
See, I'm not in comedy.
Oh, I think, was it that you could tell they were lesbians?
I'm going to stick to news.
No,
You
that's
do
okay.
comedy.
No, but I think, and again, like, and somebody who's lesbian might take issue, and I think I also, like you were saying, like, I would feel open if somebody afterwards was like, hey man, that joke about how you could tell the two penguins were both lesbians because they were both wearing tuxedos, I didn't love it. I'm open to hearing why they didn't love it. Like, that's okay. But I think that, like, it's a different game for me to make jokes about lesbians because I'm not punching down.
Let's
Punching
talk a
sideways.
little bit about the male culture, the misogyny that it often exists, not just in comedy, in the world of comedy, but in clubs, in the industry. Louis C.K. was a pretty prime example of a Me Too person. He admitted to masturbating in front of women. There was a lot of controversy around his coming back. Thoughts? I'll give it to all of you.
I'll be the, you know. I feel like you can't tell a painter not to paint. You can't tell a writer not to write. You cannot tell an artist not to do their work. And, you know, he is a comedian. That's what he does. And the only place he can do it are at comedy clubs. And if the comedy club is willing to have him, I believe in all freedom of speech, no matter what. You know, don't go see him. You can complain. You can do whatever you want. But he's still a comedian. He's going to go perform wherever he can. I mean, if we go back in history, I mean, if we go back to my living room growing up, and my mother, anti-Semite, anti-Semitic, hates the Jews, if we go back in history and see all these people who did horrible things that we had no idea about, people still wear Chanel, and she was a Nazi. Sorry, ladies. So, but I feel like, he did apologize, and I don't know what to say. He's going to do his art.
I could not. I feel like Homeboy can stay home for a while. I think like I hear what you're saying. I also feel like, boy, do I know some other people that really deserve those spots.
Yeah. Oh,
and
absolutely.
He is making other people at every club he's at. The other comics who have to be on the lineup with him. It's like some comic who's 22 and just up and coming, and like, this is her big shot. Like, man, straight up, like, that guy, you are a terrible person if you're trying to get back in clubs this earlier. Just take a seat for like, could you like at least give us a couple years to just like have another person stand up and get a chance to talk? Like, that is a wealthy, that guy, he does not need the money. He does not, like, what does he need? He needs the adulation. He needs
I'm a comic. I still go out 4 or 5 nights a week because I love doing it. But,
yeah, but you haven't, you know what I mean?
At least not to me. Yeah.
I mean, I will say what I love about this is that we can agree to disagree. That's what there are.
4 lesbians and not the same one single opinion.
Right.
I love it. That's pretty impressive.
We're not a monolith, clearly.
Like, to me, I just feel like this. If because I get asked the question all the time about is it too soon for him to come back? It's the audience. It's the audience.
That's right.
If he shows up and everybody stands there, sits there and claps and listens and laughs, well, I guess it's time for him to come back.
Right.
If the audience say, no, we don't, it's too soon, what the hell are you doing here? And they leave and they complain, then you need to go sit down. It's too soon.
She's absolutely
It's not
right.
us. It's the audience.
And we don't know.
It's the same thing with jokes. I mean,
exactly.
If you say something and maybe I don't like what you said or your joke, who am I to tell you that joke is awful or I don't like it? If these people are laughing, it's called, like what you were saying, it's called evolution. It's called evolving. I mean, back in this country, we had public hangings. Families would pack a fucking picnic and would sit out and watch people, hang. And then one day somebody said, "This don't feel cool, does it?" Potato salad feels
amazing.
I just can't enjoy my potato salad like I used to.
We're literally hearing a joke about lynching.
Yeah,
right.
But I think this gets to Judy's point from before when she was saying that people have things they don't want to hear and they just have a list of buzzwords and they think we can't joke about that. But we can joke about it depending on the context.
Right.
So like, if you ask me in the abstract, do you want to hear about joke about lynching? Probably my answer is no without knowing any other information. But I sure do want to hear that one.
Right.
Because the context makes sense and Wanda's making an interesting and very smart point.
I have a joke about
context makes the difference.
Right.
Well, so does skill. I will also add that.
Yeah.
Because I mean, as much as I really believe in a responsibility to my audience, I don't think that there are topics or words that are off limits. Like, I really wanted this special to be called rape jokes because, like, that is a phrase people use all the time. And I'm like, oh, what if when you Googled that, it was actually a survivor telling the jokes? Like, wouldn't that be more interesting to me? And I think that when we talk about taboo topics, like, there are no words that are off limits, but you have to understand that things that affect people's lives, you have to tell in a skillful way, and you have to be good at it.
But let's get back to the other aspect of the Louis C.K. question, which is the male culture, the male-dominated culture in comedy and in a lot of the other spheres that we talk about on this stage. How do you, as women coming up in this industry, combat it? Has it changed? How can women punch through?
I feel like one thing I just want to stand that, because we get this question you guys all get this question all the time, right? Like what's it like being a woman? I just would say that I always feel remiss if I don't take an opportunity to say, I know there's a lot of women here, like, it is exactly like it is in your industry, probably.
Right, exactly.
I think we get asked this question all the
Totally
time,
right.
and I'm so glad to talk about it, but you probably don't get asked this question. So I just want to say, I recognize that you probably also work in a culture where, like, you're told to listen more often than speak up, where, like, the person who has less skill is elevated above you because they have have privilege.
Get paid more. They get paid way more than
Yeah,
we
exactly.
do.
Like you're working twice as hard for half the Netflix special or whatever. Like, I get it. I think it's great for us to talk about it, and I think it also is really important for us.
You know,
for us
Wanda
to,
and I started around the same time, and you know, I met her at Thursday nights at Comedy U Grand. We got $5, and it was a Thursday night, and it was the only show all week in New York City that was all women. And that's how we got to know each other, because we never got to work together. And I remember calling clubs in the 80s and saying, hey, I'd like to work there. Can you book me? Oh, we had a woman here 3 months ago. She didn't do well. So we're not hiring any women. And it's improved. But it's nowhere near the way it should be. There's no late night TV, network television shows hosted by women. It's ridiculous.
And the writers' rooms are always absolutely there. Women are the minority in writers' rooms on late night shows. And yeah, I feel like I get asked the question a lot, and I feel like I get asked it a lot on panels where it's actually a delight to be around this many women.
Right.
But I feel like I get asked it a lot on panels where most of the panelists are men and where the person conducting the panel is a guy. And it always has this vibe like, it's getting better, right? Because I feel like they want to be told it's getting better so we can all stop worrying about it.
Right.
And we can all feel like it's fixed. And
But you know, how many shows are there about miserable white comics, like, you know, sleeping on people's couches? They're just miserable. Like, these white guys get so many shows about their miserable lives, and it's like, come on, we have a story to tell. I'm sorry you got divorced and you have to, like, sleep on someone's couch, okay? You don't deserve a friggin' show for 5 years making, like, $1 million. You know, it's
I got divorced. I want a place to talk about it.
Right.
Where someone pays me.
You had an all-female room on the show Take My Wife, yeah? And was that intentional? Is that unfair if you're looking at it from the outside?
Yeah, I mean, we had an all-female writers' room and female non-binary folks, and then the second season we had half. I think it was half of the folks were people of color, and I don't know. I mean, is it unfair? I think that show was about a relationship between two women, and it felt like the folks that we wanted to hire to tell that story would be folks who haven't gotten the opportunity to necessarily be in a room yet, and also folks who might have a personal stake in the story. So it does.
And also people with periods.
Yeah. Well, to Judy's point, I think it does matter then.
It was a joke. Tag. Oh. Sorry.
No, but there's a virtue to that as well, to having.
Well, I think it also, what I would say is like so it matters who gets the shows then, because to Judy's point, it's like if the more shows are about, say, women, people of color, like the more that is reflected in the writing staff, because that's who's going to know that world, or
seeing the world through that lens, you know.
So it, like the shows that you see on your TV, that has like a cascading effect in terms of who's staffed there all over the place.
You talked about some of the apologies that have had to be made, Kevin Hart obviously being one, about and that's also about the role of Twitter and how it's used in comedy. And Stephen Colbert had to do an apology about a gay joke. Thoughts on that and the feedback that you get, the interaction you get on Twitter?
Well, I know for me, especially if it's an African American comic, I said something when Tracy Morgan did a joke, but Tracy, he worked with GLAAD and he educated himself. I love Tracy, and when Kevin's stuff resurfaced, I missed the first apology when it came out, when he said years ago. But to me, that's the one time I will say to a comic, hey man, that's wrong. You can't say that. Because I personally know kids who have been kicked out of their homes, have been abused, because of just who they are. And also, the joke just isn't funny.
Right. That is
funny.
true.
It's just not funny.
It's not funny. It's not funny. And you can talk about anything, any subversive topic, as long as it's funny. You know, that's an important thing.
And are there certain words that are off limits besides the F word that you were talking about earlier in comedy?
Again, I think it's all with your intent.
I mean, I use words that apply to me. So like, super cool with Dyke.
Yeah.
But
I think to me, really, it all does depend on the context. And is that a community that you belong to? Do you understand the real meaning of that word? Because if it's a community that you don't belong to, you might be using that word real fast and loose and not really understand the impact of it.
Yeah, like if I hear a non-African American use the N-word, it better be a damn funny good joke. I mean, it better be like the best joke ever.
Right. Very interesting. That's very interesting. All right, we have about 4 minutes left, so I want to give you one round to summarize, which is, I
mean, like Jesus had to write that joke.
Oh, God, you're funny.
Can America take a joke in a divided America? And how important is comedy when America is this divided? What do you put thought into that when you're writing up your bits? I'll give you all 45 seconds to close. Who wants to start?
yeah, I mean, I think that. Well, first of all, I tour all over the country. Like I'm sure many of us have an opportunity to, and I think that what is happening right now is that creating a physical space that people can come to and feel united is really important. Because like on our phones, we feel so isolated and cut off, and we're being sold this lie that like people on the coast feel one way and people in the middle of the country feel a different way. By the way, like a shit ton of people here in New York actually voted for this president. So like there's not one type of person that lives one type of place, and queer people are everywhere, people of color are everywhere. And so when I love the idea right now of being able to provide people with a space that feels fun and feels lighthearted and where they can relax and we can all vent. That's why I take my responsibility to my audience so seriously.
I think we have an opportunity. There's so much information happening right now. I think we have an opportunity to help people know what to focus on. If we think that we know, if we have a strong feeling about it, and we also have an opportunity to make people feel less alone and say like, hey, I'm scared too. This is what I'm scared about. Here's some jokes about it. But at the end of the day, I'm also scared and I see you.
Yeah, I don't like where we are as a country right now. I mean, I'm an American. I love my country, and I'm just so disappointed in where we are right now. It's just so divided. And you know what? I have a great life. I'm healthy. My kids are healthy. I got a little money. I'm good. And it would be easy for me just to go and enjoy my life and get on stage and talk about bullshit like, oh yeah, my kids, and oh boy, the teachers, oh, you're doing homework. I mean, that would be so easy for me to do, but I care too much. And I know how much people are suffering, and I want to make people laugh and talk about real stuff that maybe hopefully people will start talking to each other. So if you watch my Netflix special coming out April 1st, called Not Normal, check it out.
Well, my goal in life is to make people laugh, and that's it. And, there's this idea of safe spaces, and you can't say this and you can't say that. The world is not a safe place, especially for women. And I honestly want, comedy's a uniter. It brings people together. And all I want to do is get on stage. I have my opinions. I read, I use everything as fodder. I just want to make people laugh. I don't want people to tell me what I can and cannot say. If you don't like my stuff, you don't have to listen to it. You're responsible for what you watch and what you read. And I look at comics and I'm like, oh, I don't find that funny, just like Wanda, but the audience does. And I'm like, okay, go with it. But it's really about unifying and making people laugh. And it's a powerful, powerful thing, laughter.
Well, that's a wonderful way to finish it off. Tina Brown is waiting in the end to say goodnight to us. Thank you so much.
Hey,
for joining us.
Thank you. Wow.
Hi.
God bless unsafe spaces, I say. I cannot thank you all for bringing your hysterical edge and your laughter out of after a very big and thoughtful day. Really, I mean, you are the best crew, and you should have a late night show, just the four of you. Oh, yeah. Just let's sit.
Yeah.
Okay. That's what we need. Okay. So tomorrow, we're all going to be back here at 9:30, or is it 9 o'clock? Give me the right time, somebody. Okay, 9:30.
No, 9
o'clock. 9 o'clock.
o'clock.
I can't even get that right. I'm so lame. Anna Winter and I are going to be sitting there having a great catch-up. So I hope that you'll join us for that. We also have Bryan Cranston and Glenda Jackson and Indra Nooyi and a special last guest who we will announce tomorrow. So thank you, everybody, for being here for day 2 of the summit. Day 3 is tomorrow. On your way out, check out the Women in the World Boutique presented by MasterCard and Synchrony. It's in Lincoln Center's David Rubenstein Atrium. It's open until 8. Now go away and chew over everything that you heard. Thank you.
Thank you for coming to the 10th Annual Women in the World Summit. Please make sure to visit the Women in the World Boutique, featuring merchandise handcrafted by 16 different female artisans, including a sweater collaboration with Lingua Franca. The boutique is presented by MasterCard and Synchrony. It is located across the street at the David Rubenstein Atrium.
Hello and welcome to the Weekly Space Hangout for Wednesday, April 10th, 2019. I'm Fraser Kane, publisher of Universe Today. This week we're going to be talking about, guess what? The black hole picture taken by the Event Horizon Telescope. Joining me this week, we've got... we will also be talking... There's a couple of other stories.
Science happened,
yeah, other
too.
science might have happened. So we will be talking about... revisiting Mars' methane, an artificial aurora, volcanoes on metal asteroids are so metal, as well as Curiosity seeing 2 solar eclipses on Mars, and then to keep you updated on some exciting things that are now going to happen tomorrow. Joining me this week on my screen,